Devil, my friend. Fashion. Things to wear. Possibly faces covered, but more importantly, covering up the bodies. Merch. We have that now. We are very, very excited to announce that Vampire and the Devil have partnered with our friends at Rock and Horror Apparel. They are now taking care of the actual merch, the exclusive merch for the Vampire and Devil podcast, modeled by our very sexy devil right here.
Oh, yeah.
But we have all kinds of goodies to share with you.
Got the hoodies, we got some shirts, we got some tanks coming up, we got some booty shorts, we got all the stuff you want to wear from the Vampire and Devil podcast, thanks to Rock and Horror.
Horns up, fangs out.
Sci-fi, my friend. Sci-fi horror. Creepy things. Things that were made by man. Things that came from outer space. Things that might have come from the underground. Things that make your head explode there, my dear devil. A little bit of sci-fi horror seems apropos. It seems overdue. So I say we get into it as we talk about the Lament configuration. Oh, shit. Wrong comparison. Wrong franchise. Let's talk a little bit about the Cube, my friend, as we pit that up against a little bit of Cronenberg in Scanners. But Sci-Fi Horror Showdown, it is now. This is the place. It is the time, my good friend. Cube, Scanners. What do we say?
Yeah, it's time for some sci-fi horror. Now, it depends on how you're going to spell it. Are you going to spell it S-C-I-F-I? Or we're going to go old school like S-C-Y-F-Y, like the old school sci-fi channel when they used to have it on there. Maybe, we don't know. But yeah, we're definitely going to see some cool, they're going to talk about some cool kills. You're going to find out, that heads do explode. And, all kinds of crazy shit and within the Cube and within Scanners, man, it's fun, like I said, it's always different ways you can go with sci-fi. We've gone, kind of science fiction with aliens and stuff like that. This time we're doing a little bit of like man-made, sort of who knows made, kind of techie a little bit, but you never know what you're going to get with these sci-fi horrors. And I think these two are, again, like sometimes we like to do it, a little bit close to movies. These are two completely different movies with completely different, storylines and characters and plots and shit. But the only thing that these movies probably have in common is, yes, they are sci-fi horror. And yes, you're going to see lots of blood and guts and dead shit.
Absolutely. And they also both blessed us, both franchises blessed us with forgettable sequels that they really didn't need to do.
Yeah.
That's another thing we can say about both Cube and Scanners, is that they both gave us just forgettable sequels that had like no point in getting made. So Devil, my friend, we'll just cover that in advance. We don't need to get into that later. It's like, why? Look, I understand the appeal. I understand, the checkbook. But sometimes when it comes to just good, classic, fun movies, it's kind of like, fuck, man, why? But oh well. We'll get into that maybe some other time a little bit more in depth. But yeah, man, The Cube, 1997, a little bit of Saw before Saw. Very, very interesting put together movie. It's a series of people brought in, put in a cube, each having like a particular talent, and having to find a way to work their way out of this. And while this movie's got some really interesting kills to it, it's a bunch of people in a cube with a bunch of traps that could kill them, yet there's only like 2 kills in this movie. It's really, really interesting. It's got that little bit of like unique start to the movie with a little bit of blood on your hands that is very easy to miss if you're not paying attention. But the overall design of that movie definitely has that Saw-ish feel to it. It's really the most, well-known franchise that it can be compared to as far as like, the common populace of horror fans that aren't familiar with the Cube looking for something to relate it to. Saw is going to be the closest thing. It's still its own thing. It's not really particularly the same. There are concepts, though, that do fit properly when it comes to that, but they definitely are the different kind of thing. But yeah, series of skilled people put in a cube, having to kind of apply their skills, communicate with each other, deal with their curiosities of each other as well, which is probably my overall like favorite part of this movie is the way I'm watching the victims interacting with each other. One of them who you think is going to be the most level-headed, who becomes the most unlevel-headed, and also somebody who you don't really think is on the level, but is got a good heart to them, who ends up technically becoming a killer. But it's just a very, very interesting design movie.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I said. That's why it's the best. Like you said earlier, with the best way to compare it is Saul before Saul, and it's not, and like I said, not completely in like way the storyline is and the way that it's basically just the traps, but the traps are not necessarily like when with the John Kramer makes, there's a good chance of you surviving these traps. They're made to like are you willing to shed a little bit of blood or go through a little bit of pain to come out, where these are traps where they're designed to basically kill you. They're not they're not trying to do anything. But I like the whole the whole concept of that. And it's funny, you say there's only like 5 or 6 people in this movie, and the traps tend to only kill like 1 or 2 people in this. It's eventually one of the characters just kind of goes crazy AWOL and just starts killing everybody, and kind of in that, in that kind of cabin fever sort of, delusional, kind of paranoia slash like, the, being in a trapped area, kind of basically bringing out this like the worst in humanity kind of thing. And that's what I like about this movie. It kind of has that too, where it's like it's like put these people in there and see if people can work together and people can figure out stuff. And then you got people who are trying to figure out the way these traps work and the way these cube works and stuff like that. And and it works for a little while, then you kind of figure out that it doesn't kind of work. And like my favorite part of the whole thing is it's got like that kind of like Rain Man kind of feel, because you have a character that has it has like a he's a little bit of a mentally slow, but he's also one of those guys that like they eventually find that he does have like a huge talent, sort of like in in like I said in the Rain Man movie, where it's like the dude in Rain Man can't spell cat, but you can take him to Las Vegas and he can count cards and count numbers like a freaking genius. And that's kind of like what this movie reminds me. It's like this guy don't know how to do anything, but you ask him what 100 divided by 7 and multiply that by 6, and then to have that find to the times 30 to times 4, and he knows it like a human calculator.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. You have that kind of it to it. And then like I said, it's like you got that paranoia. You don't know, is it the government that did this? And then you find out like the people within it. The one guy kind of made the cube, but then he didn't really make it. He was kind of just like a guy that was there and kind of doing stuff for it, but didn't know. He thought it was just for a video game, and everybody thinks, okay, maybe this guy has something to do with it. And then the conspiracies of like, oh, maybe it's not, it's the government. Oh, maybe it's aliens. Maybe it's this. So I always like that. And like I said, it's just a fun movie because it remind me of like those kind of movies that came out in that mid to late 90s, like where you had like Ghost Ship that just starts off with that sick ass kill of boom, piano wire cutting people's heads, and like you have like that in this movie where it's just like just starts off with some cool kills. And it's just a fun movie. Like I said, overall, I mean, it is a very not common movie for horror fans, and even fans who are probably into horror probably aren't more into this, because it's very techy and it's very like number crunching, and they're doing a lot of math and all this kind of stuff like that. And it's kind of like a weird movie, but it's always been one that like it's one of those movies that kind of grained like into my brain. It's like, oh my god, it's such a cool concept movie where like you're inside this cube that's constantly moving, and you got rooms that might do this and traps that might do that, and they're throwing their boots to see if whether or not this is trapped, and they think it's not trapped, and then all of a sudden it's another different kind of trap. And I just like the whole concept of that. And like I said, and then like I said, this was way before Saw came out, and then Saw was like, oh, cool, man, this is like, just like that whole cool concept of like, what would you try to do to try to get, try to survive out of like this thing. I mean, me personally, if it wasn't for the for Rain Man or the other girl that was kind of smart, yeah, I would have been dead instantly, because I'd be one of those idiots that they would send as a guinea pig to check the rooms and make sure that it's not booby trapped.
No, totally. I feel like I would be that guy who just like does that thing where it's like, nah, okay, let's not move. We don't want to do something stupid. But I would just be that guy who thinks he's just calmly leaning against the wall, but would just manage to lean against a trigger that just sends like a spear through my head or something like that, where I would just be like, great. Yeah, that's me. I'm that guy. Yeah. Like, I like this movie a lot. I thought this was a really cool movie for you to pick, and I really liked the showdown idea of this particular design for us. I will say, though, and like you had already just touched on it, I do think this is a very tricky movie for horror fans, because I do think there's a certain amount of like insufferable nonsense to this movie. And while I love the idea of that box constantly changing, and also, I made jest of it when I opened the episode, but like, I am a big Hellraiser fan, and I love the lament configuration in the puzzle box. And so like, it opens and it spins and it turns into like a diamond, or it comes back out, or turns into a trapezoidian type thing, or gets really long, or what. I love all that kind of stuff. And I love the concept of the movie. The idea of these people waking up in the cube kind of reminds me a little bit about when you and I had a discussion about The Platform, and when, that inmate woke up in his cell and he has to learn about where he is and what's going to happen while he's in there, and has to adjust because of it. So there are definitely things about this movie that I think are very cool, very good. I think the movie, as far as a stylistic movie, about how, not so much a stylistic movie, a stylistic script about how you would design storytelling and getting invested in characters, I think this movie does it just about as good as anybody who's ever done it. I think the way that the script is written and the idea of character investment is great. And that was the thing that I really liked about the movie. But I did find the movie, just as a kind of overall concept, a little insufferable, because it was just like, dude, I get it. It works. I like mini casts. I love to get kind of invested in small casts. I mean, shit, you and I talked about Antichrist, which has 2 people for the entire movie, so to speak. But I do think there's a lot to be said as far as watching a movie like this, as far as getting into your own head and really just letting your brain work. The whole, the average human only uses 10% of your brain. Absolutely. This movie makes you use more of it, because you really have to think about things and you really kind of have to watch. But yeah, the kills are great. I loved the whole like cubism, slice and dice type thing, very reminiscent of like that laser grid from like Resident Evil. The one, the solid impaling. You had the character that you get the jump scare where the guy's got like, a melted like chunk out of his face, and that's just gone. And then I was a big fan of just the good old fashioned just drop to your death, kind of a thing. But I do, I think the movie's great. Overall, though, I do find the movie to be a very tough sell for horror fans in general. But when you get that science fiction infusion, like, I bet there's a lot of horror fans out there that don't realize that a movie like Event Horizon is a horror movie, where they see the pictures or they look at the title and they're like, that's just a straight science fiction movie. That's just a in space type movie. And I feel like The Cube is a little bit tricky and does kind of ride that wave a little bit of like, you really got to give it a chance. You really got to sit down and watch. and don't judge a book by its cover, because you might look at the cover or look at some photos and just be like, okay, and maybe see a kill or just photos of it and be like, well, I guess that could happen a number of ways. Well, sure. But don't you kind of want to know how it happened? It's definitely a movie where I think it's very easy for somebody to get invested should they decide to watch correctly. But I do think that this movie is very tricky in its design and concept with getting the hooks in you. When they get you, I really think it'll take you on a ride. But I do think it falls into a category of like the gatekeeping horror fans that we're kind of famous for having would shun this movie based off not giving it enough of a chance or even reading enough into it, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like an intellectual sci-fi movie too, because like I said, it does a lot, that, and like I said, with that storyline too, it's like you're stuck in a. I mean, when you watch it, you kind of see a lot of things happening the same time over and over and over again. You get a lot of the same scenes that seem like they're repeating itself a lot.
Yeah.
But you got to realize you're stuck in a cube. How much you're gonna do? Obviously, yeah. The whole purpose is to find out, is this room safe or is that room safe? So you're gonna hear a lot of that throughout the movie, and it's like, okay, yeah, we get it. But it's like, what else are you really gonna do? I mean, yeah. Now, granted, if you decided to put more cast, if you would have put 30 or 40 people in there, then yeah, you could have killed 27, 28 of them with cool ways of the cubes, and then that would have done done its course, and it probably would have gotten a bigger audience for it. But for the fact that it is only a very tight knit, 6, 7, 8 people or whatever like that, and a lot of it's really, more like I said, more the deaths are more related to character wise as versus the cube wise. It definitely does have that, has that little bit of thing. But like I said, it's one of those ones where you got to realize, like, this is like just like Event with the only thing with the Event Horizon, it's got a little bit of that horror more to it. This is definitely more sci-fi than horror, but it definitely still fits the sci-fi horror realm though. So that's why I picked it. And then like you said, you're talking about, like, we'll mention it for a second, but with the sequels and stuff like that, and then they made a remake. The remake, completely skip. 2 isn't bad. 3 gets horrible. The only problem with 2 is that they kind of just made it too sci-fi, and it's like all of a sudden, like, the cube can turn into things, and it doesn't make kind of any sense, because now it's more not man-made. It's more like outer spacey kind of feel to it.
Kind of
The only
Death
cool thing,
Star-y.
the only cool thing about the second movie is, like, the rooms are a lot cooler. You get a lot more cooler deaths where there's not just rooms that are traps. Like when you step into it, sometimes it might be a freeze one or a fire one, or it might take your breath. Or they definitely elaborated more as far as what can we do, expanding as far as the trap wise. But yeah, the first one is definitely my favorite one. And like I said, just because it's very simplicity. It's very simple. It's a very simple movie. I mean, it's a high concept movie because it's a very intellectual film, but it's a very simple premise. It's a bunch of people stuck in a cube trying to figure out how to get out, and you mixed in with a little bit of like psycho, freaking, people going crazy, delusional, schizophrenic kind of thing, or like that, you're going out without. You got to realize these people are living, hours and days going without food, without water. So your body starts to, your brain starts to take things and stuff like that. So you start getting delusional, and you start seeing things or hearing things, and you start going crazy. And, the one character in the movie, he takes out most of our characters in this movie, and, it's like you said, he's just like, he's just all over crazy bullshit, craziness. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's definitely, when it comes up to, the movies, especially in the horror realms and that sci-fi, it's definitely more that science fiction stuff. But it's definitely one that I think if people haven't seen it, you need to watch it. Yes, it's not the greatest movie in the entire world because it is very you know, unfortunately it's a cube, but it is a one-dimensional film where you can only do so much. There's only so much. You got to realize at that time it wasn't a hugely budgeted movie to begin with either. So,
But it looked
you
sharp.
had that, I like I said, it's one of those movies that it's not the greatest science fiction horror movie ever, but it's one of those ones that if you watch it and really immerse yourself into it, it's one of those films that you won't forget. It definitely stays in your mind. You're like, oh my God, yeah, that was such a crazy movie.
No, you're definitely right about that, Devil, 100%, man. Because yeah, it is one of those things too, where like it's such a small cast, it's such a small space that yeah, there's a lot of repeating that goes on to it, which does kind of tread and tightrope a little bit on like monotonous and stuff like that. But again, it's such an intimate situation that the kills also mean something. And again, like you had said, there's like 20 people in this cube, or if they did like 50 people in like based on like 3 cubes in the big inside the big Death Star or whatever you want to call it, then yeah, there's room for a lot more deaths, but then they also become kind of brainless as well, where it's just like, okay, yeah, oh, hey, there's another person just getting their head just lopped off, or this, that, or the other thing. So there's the intimacy of the movie definitely does play to its strengths, and that's something that I think is really really cool about what it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when it came to the Event Horizon thing, I only meant it more in the comparison of like, what's in a name, like
Well,
what's in the pictures, like the movies themselves. Absolutely, you've got Event Horizon, much more horror. Cube, 100% more sci-fi. I just mean for that person who like sees a title, maybe sees a shot or two of like a still frame, and kind of judge it and kind of maybe skips over it because of those reasons, where they're kind of like, I'm not a sci-fi guy, kind of a thing. That's all I mean with that comparison, is that whole kind of like, what's in a name kind of thing. But absolutely, my friend. But let's jump into the obituaries, my friend. Let's kick it right over to you. How do you look at the cube? I think it's solid. I have a couple of things that I'll discuss about it. But overall, how do you look at it?
I mean, for me, like I said, I wouldn't go as far as saying it's the greatest film in the entire world, but that's the crazy thing about it. Is like whenever you kind of compare it to other like huge, like you said, like even like an Event Horizon or something like that. Yeah, Event Horizon and those kind of movies are a lot more greater of a movie. And you remember little things. I mean, there's parts of Event Horizon that kind of beard into your brain. But like I said, it was one of those there's like movies like The Cube is one of those movies where it's like you wouldn't think that you would not really necessarily like it, because you can I mean, like I said, people are a lot of people are probably gonna dislike it more than they like this movie. But it's one of those ones that like even if you dislike it, you're still gonna remember it because it's a cool concept, and it's something that hasn't been done. It's in a world where yeah, now you can say, I mean, there's been movies with traps and booby traps, and obviously, like I said, this is precursor to Saw, so you
Yeah.
can't really go into that. But there's been other movies that have had that kind of feel to it, but never to the point where like this, where you're stuck in this this box basically, and you don't know what this room's gonna do and that room's gonna do. So it's like in the fact of like with that, it's such an original film that like I said, it always just stuck with me. And like I said, just the actor that plays the mentally handicapped person the whole time, I've always just remembered him the whole entire time. He's just one of those things that I've always had stuck in my head, where he's like, blue room, I don't like the red room, and things like that, where it was like, I think he played a person who would probably he's probably on the spectrum, or things like with that, but he played, that actor played it very well, that it was just a memorable role, kind of like like I said, sort of like your with Rain Man and stuff like that with that. So it's one of those characters that you kind of remember. So like I said, when it came to this movie, like I said, I've always just found this movie fun. and I just always liked it. I always thought it was just a cool concept and overall. So like for me, I gotta give it a 7.0 just because it's like, like I said, it's normally I wouldn't put a movie like this as high up, but I think just because it's such an original film, there really hasn't been anything like it as far as other than the other cubes that have kind of come out. And like you said, the platform and some other movies now that have kind of sort of taken on sort of like this thing, but it really lives by its own self. It's there's really no way to no other movie to kind of compare it
Yeah.
completely to. So it's just like for me, it's like that. And the fact that, like I said, it's all the actors are not big. There's not any big actors in this movie, so it's kind of like kept it kind of low. And like I said, with it being a smaller cast, you kind of got invested to each character, so you
Yeah.
like certain characters and you hate certain characters, so you're kind of like invested, and you're like, oh man, no, when person dies, you're like, oh shit, why, no, why, and then like I'll do a spoiler alert right now, but the handicapped guy does live, and you're like, yeah, fuck yeah. The guy who you would assume because of his handicap would be the one that would go out in 5 seconds is the one
Right.
who survives. So it's like I love that for that. So like I said, normally with a movie like this, especially if it hadn't just ingrained so much memory in my head, like, oh my god, I love The Cube. And I talked to people before, I'm like, you've seen The Cube? Dude, this movie's freaking isn't we talk about it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like normally I wouldn't give a movie like this as high regards, but just because it's such a weird movie, and it's such a, like I said, it's not necessarily one of those horror movies that like you gotta know to know, but
Yeah.
it's always it's one of those ones where like if you talk about Saw or you talk about like Texas Chainsaw or like you said Hellraiser, everybody knows about those movies. Where when you find somebody who's actually seen The Cube, you kind of get geeked out and you're like, oh shit, yeah, and you start talking about it. So it's like it's to me, I think those are more fun when you find those sort of hidden gems. And like I said, it's not everybody's cup of tea. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. Most people are probably not going to like this movie whatsoever if they haven't seen it.
Yeah.
But for me, like I said, when you find that person, it's like, oh yeah, man, you got to talk about it. But that's the only reason why I give it a little bit higher marks than what normally I would give a movie at this caliber.
No, for sure, Devil. I'm with you on that one, man. I'll match you on that for sure. Yeah, I do think that, when it comes to like the common horror populace, I think like the average horror fan is going to give this movie like a 5 to a 6. I think, they're going to max out at about a 6 for it, kind of like based on like not fully understanding, kind of having the attention span of a gnat. And again, also dealing with the fact that it's, 6 people in a room. Those are the only 6 people you're going to see all movie. And they're just they have tendencies to be just kind of hard on it when it comes to that. But all of your points are very valid. I mean, it's got memorable kills. It's got reasons to remember the movie as well. Exactly. You have the handicapped person who you think would make that simple mistake simply because they don't know any better. And that's a wrap on them. But no, he handles his own, and the skill set that he has outside of his handicap plays into a large effect when it comes to this movie. But I think all of the stuff that you talked about is valid. It is a memorable movie when you watch it, when you have those memories ingrained. And again, when you also come across people who are in or familiar with those type of movies, you get that extra little bit of like juice or adrenaline to get to talk to them about it and be like, wait, you've watched this movie, let alone that you've even actually heard of it. Like, that's amazing. So I'm definitely with you on that, man. I'm totally down, man. We'll give it a 7. We'll give it a 7.0, man, for The Cube in the first part of the showdown. But let's jump into 1981. Let's go back a little further into time. Let's talk about Scanners. And I mean, dude, I fucking love Cronenberg movies, dude. They're so awesome. They're just so fun. What I do like also about Scanners, also in this basic comparison too, is like it does have strength of a specific movie with a story to tell. And not that Cube doesn't have a story to tell, but it's that intertwined, like we just discussed, of why are these people here? What do they know that another person doesn't? And how do they work together to ultimately survive? And some did and some didn't. when it comes to scanners, it's a traditional movie design. It's based, off, a scientist who's working with someone to stop a more scary, powerful version of themselves. It's like, it's kind of like they make fun of in like The Simpsons and stuff like that, where it was like, when they would look back at something like The Shining, the power that you have, in what they call having the shining, where in this is, referred to as scanning, which is also kind of funny considering that technically the movies are only about a year apart. But I love Cronenberg stuff. I love the way he shoots the movies. I'm a big fan of like those kind of like grainy style movies. I think they bring a lot of unique aspects to them where it's not a huge series of like bright lights, in big cities. So I like Cronenberg's design of that, and so many other Cronenberg movies that I love, even movies like Death Race 2000, which is by no means a horror movie, but I just love the design behind it. Plus, it's a really, really old school original Sylvester Stallone movie, which is always fun there as well. But I think Scanners is really, really cool, but I like the concept of like that kind of detective story, that kind of cat and mouse with just a whole lot of death sprinkled in. And of course, it really has one of the most iconic kills that is very much remembered. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah, I mean it definitely has that. Like, I love this film because it definitely, like you were saying, it has that like grainy, dark feeling. It kind of gives you that, like, sort of like movies like RoboCop and things like that, where it's just, like the Dead Zone and stuff like that. It's got that kind of like feel to it where you're kind of like, with most of his films, it's definitely like more of his films, Cronenberg's films, are usually more body horror with art. They're sort of artsy too with it, where this is more like just straight up kind of grainy, kind of, guerrilla underground kind of feel to it. I mean, like I said, yeah, and like you said, the iconic, I mean, everybody who probably has never seen this movie, if you go, oh, you ever seen this movie where, I don't know what the hell the name of this movie is, but there's this one scene where the dude's head explodes. People are going to go, Scanners, like you said, people who don't even know this movie, maybe never even seen this movie, have at least seen somewhere on the internet memes or gifs or something of, the main head explosion in the movie, which, like I said, it's just, it's that's what kind of gives this movie that iconicness of that. And straight out, within the first like 20-30 minutes of the movie, man, you got that scene where it's just, yeah, it's just great. And I love like I said, I love the whole like kind of mountain, because they're trying to figure out who's scanners and who's not scanners and stuff like that. The government, obviously the government made these people and did all this kind of stuff like that, and you never know exactly what's all going on. And then it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna try to do, one guy's trying to scan, and then like you scan and like, oh, we're gonna show you, and the guy's like, oh, okay, let me just do this, and then yeah, like he said, he ends up getting his head blown off and stuff like that. I mean, like I said, it's just a cool concept. They try to get that, the scientist is trying to get this guy to infiltrate this, cult guy, this main guy who's trying to run it. He's trying to take over the world and basically like, kill everybody, only scanners allowed in this club kind of feel to it, you know what I mean? Then you had, with that one where you have the main guy who, was it, what the hell is his name?
Well,
Jeremy Iron.
Michael Ironside.
Michael Ironside. Yeah, his guy who's
playing Daryl.
Yeah, he got his scanner guys who are like the over the top craziness of scanners. They're like the extremists, you know what I mean? Like, you talk about, like, with people with terrorists and things like that and things that have come around now, they're more that extremists that they're purists that, boom, they want to kill everybody like that. Then you have another scanner groups that are kind of like, yeah, we can kind of live with people and stuff like that, and we can all kind of be sharing kumbaya. And then you have the scientists guys guys that are like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe we probably shouldn't have these scanners because they're too powerful. It's like a superhero and stuff like that. These guys can, do whatever they want to do and control the world, but maybe we should kind of go in with these kumbaya guys because, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing, and maybe we can do that. And it's like, yeah, you're trying to go through it, and you're like, the whole entire film, you're like, yeah, fuck that. I'm on Ironside, man. If I'm one of these guys, I'm like, fuck you, man. You guys like did all this experiment. You're the ones who like experimented on, on our people and stuff like that and made these scanners. And now that, just like anything else, you make AI, you're like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then AI bites you in the ass. Well, that's your own fault for making them. You made us. You knew exactly what you were doing. You were trying to make a powerful bioweapon for the military or something like that. And, when it bites you in the ass, you know, they're like, oh no, now we want to try to kill everybody that's the scanner. And it's like, well, no, yeah, go ahead and try, but you're a puny mortal and I can just blow your head off and do all this crazy shit. I can make you. And it's like, and that's the cool thing about it. It's like, it's not just that, it's that whole, people don't realize that the scanning part of it is this whole thing of all these movies coming around with the telekinesis and stuff like that, where it's basically just these guys can basically make you do whatever they want you to do. They want you to, like, put a gun to your head and blow your brains out. You're gonna do it. It's the craziness of it. But then again, within this world too, my only gripe, I guess, of this whole entire film, it does have a lot of slow burn sections, and it is a very kind of slow film in certain parts. When it gets into the action, the action is freaking crazy, you know what I mean? Throughout the whole entire movie, they go and find the one guy who's making all like these model mannequins and shit, and people are getting killed left and right, and it's like a Michael Bay movie where shit's blowing up constantly, and fucking there's like war and people getting shot and heads getting exploded and bodies getting killed and shit like that. So it's very, very violent, very actionable film, but within the storyline, it kind of gives you that little bit of a slow burn too, and it
does. It definitely does. Like, ultimately, I do think, it works. In this particular movie, it works for the concept and the build because, like I said before, it's got so much of that cat and mouse feel to it. It's kind of part detective story. And that's something that I've always also liked about this movie. And it's so funny too, like, as I love scanners, and I think about Michael Ironside, like, in particular too, because I'm always just like, man, has there ever been a more consistent dick in their filmography than this guy? I mean, when you look at the character and the way that you were also talking about, where you've got, like, Michael's character with Daryl with the scanners, they're the angry, destroy all humanity kind of thing. And then you've got the other peeps that are just kind of like, yeah, I'm just living life. Don't bother me. They don't bother me. I don't bother them. And then you look also another Michael Ironside movie like Total Recall, where again, he's the leader of like another extremist group who's trying to hunt down, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character. And then even just something as simple as like his appearance in Major Payne, where he just plays an alcoholic stepfather. I mean, he's played such a consistent dick in his movies that you recognize his face. And he also, I would have a hard time actually seeing him as a hero in a movie. He's just ingrained himself in my horror subconscious as just that guy with such a punchable face that you just keep waiting kind of for him to like get his just desserts and stuff like that.
But then again, isn't he kind of he's, I guess, in somewhat of a faction, he'd be somewhat of a hero in almost said Super Troopers, not Super Troopers. Fucking the Starship Troopers.
Oh yeah, no, in Starship,
his character is sort of a hero in that.
He's absolutely got those good parts, and I love Starship Troopers, dude. And no, absolutely, he's fantastic in that movie, and it's cool seeing him, in a role where he's like, a teacher, and he's you know, teaching the students and trying to give them their understanding of what service means versus just living your life as, you know, a commoner kind of a thing. So like, I super duper get it. But he just has so many great villainous roles that but he's also such a fantastic actor. So like when he was playing, you know, Rychek in Starship Troopers, it worked. It made sense. It was all good. But he's such an excellent villain. He's just such a great heel. I mean, the showdown scene that he has as we come towards a close of, you know, him and the main scanner duking it out, the other scanner like taking themselves out, where he kind of ultimately seems like he's gonna win, which doesn't exactly quite play out that way. But from the, you know, having the blood coming out of the veins, you know, warping of the face, but then you think he's going to get his, but then ultimately he makes the character spontaneously combust and he's just a corpse in ashes. Yeah, it's just one of those things where like I love him as just a villainous character.
Yeah.
And I just think it's super duper cool. But, you know, it's also got a high kill count in this movie. But again, it's one of those like, it's funny. It's kind of like what we were talking about before, where it's got a little casual bit of that brainlessness to it. But again, when it's dealing with, you know, psychedelic, you know, killers, you're gonna have some people that they just off for the sake of offing. It's like, you're taking too long in the Starbucks line. You know, it's over. I'm over you. It's my turn now. It's got a little bit of that fun kind of feel to it. But I mean, ultimately, I do think this movie's just like a lot of fun. You know, it's just, it's got that duke 'em out. It's very 80s, very Cronenberg. And overall, I think it's a good time, man. I mean, you know, when it comes to the obituaries and the ultimate like back and forth when it comes to this one, I do give this somewhat of a high rating. I've always liked the story of it. I've loved the design. Like I said, I've always enjoyed the way it was shot, and I also think that I think it's very like the Cube. It's very memorable. If you're in for storytelling in this type of, you know, cops and robbers feel, the slow burns work to your advantage because, like you said, when it goes, man, it goes, and it's bloody and explosive and it's awesome. It's just a matter of whether certain burns are your style. There's a lot of stuff where I'm not the world's biggest slow burn person. I don't need it to be crazy, you know, every second of the movie, blood and gore and action and this. I like to think about things. I like getting in my own head about movies. But I've always found that certain burns need to fit in my brain a certain way. But I really like the burns of this movie. I think they play perfectly to where they need to get to. There's some burns. We talked recently about The Omen. There's burns in The Omen that you kind of are like, okay, now they're just doing a lot of talking and discussing about this child and blah, blah, blah. But then when they get to the end of the tunnel and there's this killing, this death, this, that, it's kind of like, wow, what a great journey, or man, I'm so glad I got to here. So it's definitely going to be different strokes for different folks, and especially with what movies are now and how they're designed and shot, that early 80s and those Cronenberg grainy style movies are definitely very tricky. But I've always loved this movie. I've always thought it was really solid. I think it stands the test of time. I really do. And I think it does give you so much of that memorable feel to it and so many things that just stick in your subconscious. That, I mean, I like this movie at a 7.5.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you on like that, especially when it comes to it. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying it's my favorite Cronenberg movie. I've liked a lot of other Cronenberg's movies, but it's one of those Cronenberg movies that sticks into your brain just because of that iconic, head explosion scene. Is probably one of the coolest shots, things on film ever. It's just a cool concept, and the way they made it, putting,
Filled with such gross things.
Filled this, this thing with like nasty, like cow livers and this kind of stuff and dog food and this and this and that. Just made it all kind of greasy and gross. So just for literally for a scene that lasts like 5 milliseconds, but it's just so nasty and grimy. Just even when you read about all the stuff they used in it, it's like, ugh, now it even makes it even worse.
That set probably smelled so bad when that explosion happened.
Yeah. And then, like I said, it's cool too, because it's like, like you said, Michael Ironside's a bad guy. I think he just kind of, like you said, I think he just has a face for playing a villain. And, most villains in movies kind of die, and theoretically, Michael Ironside dies, but does he? Because the brother goes into Michael Ironside's body, so Michael Ironside wins. He gets a character that gets killed, and he still survives the movie. So he's getting paid double for that movie now.
Seriously. He gets to collect 2 paychecks.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, man, I died, but I get to pay. I'm still alive, so I get the death and the survival paycheck. So I'm good to go. But yeah, like I said, yeah, I mean, to me, like I said, I've always thought it was a fun movie. You know what I mean? Going back and watching it, because it's been a while since I've watched it, but it's one of those movies that I've watched. I wouldn't go say I watch all the time, but I probably within every couple of years will still throw it down, because I'm always like, oh yeah, what am I in the mood for? Oh fuck, I haven't seen Scanners for a while. I'm into seeing some crazy ass, like, over the top, like we mentioned RoboCop and shit like that, like over the top kills and shit like that. So it's always a fun and good time. And like I said, yeah, I definitely agree with you, especially when it comes to, I mean, overall, I would like to say that I would want the Cube to win, but in a real world, I mean, like I said, that's more of like personal thing. Scanners is definitely, for people who are into horror and into sci-fi, it's definitely a more higher up on the list of that. Just because, yeah, like I said, just like we said with Event Horizon, where there's a lot of horror into it. Same thing with Scanners. It's it definitely, I mean, it definitely checks out a lot of different other boxes. It's definitely science fiction. It's definitely an action film. It's definitely a drama. I mean, there's a lot of like drama and stuff like that. You would find out where, the other scanner they're going after, you find out they're brothers and from the same, some from the same offspring, so that's why they're so powerful and things like that. So they definitely got a little bit of that. It's very story driven and character driven versus like some of those. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, yeah, it's definitely, I mean, you can't say that it's not a horror film, because not only, like I said, not only just the head explosion scene, there's a lot of just superly graphic deaths and kills and things happen in this movie that yeah, it's definitely still science fiction, because like I said, just like like you go into the telekinesis where like what they said with the dead zone, or maybe even something like Firestarter, where Firestarter is, I would say, is a horror film, but this is more horror than Firestarter is, but it's still got that, it clicks that box for science fiction because of the telekinesis and these abilities and stuff like that. And then it clicks the horror genre because obviously, with a Cronenberger film, they're going to make you puke in some scenes. So it's, you're going to get some disgusting shit in this film. So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you with a 7.5. Like I said, it's definitely not the top of my list of Cronenberg films, but it's definitely on the list. I mean, it's definitely a fun movie, and it's, like I said, it's definitely, there's no, like I said, in my world, yeah, I would love to see the Cube win, but in a realistic real world, yeah, I mean, like I said, even people who are not into horror, maybe deep diving horror, like with Scanners, more people are gonna know Scanners, more people are gonna seen Scanners, more people at least have heard or at least know of Scanners, mainly because of that one scene, versus Cube, where Cube is such a very smaller, definitely a smaller fan club as far as movie wise. So yeah, I definitely agree with a 7.5, as far as Scanners going.
Yeah, no, for sure, brother. So that's the way that it's going to be. But Fangs and Infernos, make sure that you guys check out the Cube, because like we discussed before, like that movie is also just so well thought out and just well written as a way to really make your brain work and make you think. that it really is worthy of just a follow-up nudge to be like, hey guys, it might not have gotten the drop on this particular showdown, but it's definitely worth your time. It's definitely worth checking out. So make sure you guys are checking out the cube. But when it comes to the showdown, it is a victory for Vampire on this one by a 0.5, a 7.5 to a 7.0. Scanners has taken out the cube in our sci-fi, our science fiction showdown. So that's the way it shall be. As always, super duper love, so much love and respect and love and just awesomeness to our Fangs and Infernos, but a lot of special love and consideration and respect to the partners, the sponsors of the Vampire and Devil podcast. Make sure that you guys are checking all of them out, from our friends at Brutalities, our good friend Chris at the Buffalo Bill House, and as well as the Witchboard Museums of both Salem and Baltimore, and that's just to name a few. But, of course, make sure that you guys are shopping through Rock and Horror Apparel, our friends Mark and Lizzie, who are in charge of all of your Vampire and Devil merch. Make sure you guys are going to rockandhorror.com and check the Vampire and Devil collab category for your shirts, your hoodies, your tanks, your booty shorts, your hats, all that good stuff, and your tees, all that great stuff. We want to see you wear it because we wear it. If we like it, you like it. Horns up. Fangs out.
Devil, my friend. Oh, yeah. I think if there's anybody who would know hot things, it's you.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's only right that you let our beloved Fangs know what they can order now, courtesy of Coney Island.
Oh, yeah, man. We're in the kitchen. You know it gets hot in the kitchen. And what else better for your finger foods, for your tacos, for your victims that you may be eating? Maybe some sauce. And you should get it from the sauce boss. Coney Island sauce. Oh, yeah. Get some of that good stuff. Oh, yeah. You like to sprinkle it on anything. You could sprinkle it on your fingers. Sprinkle it on your toes. Sprinkle it on your hose. Anything you want to sprinkle goes.
Absolutely. We have partnered with Coney Island Saucery. Aaron is fantastic. We really appreciate all the love he's given to the show, and we're very, very pleased and honored to be a part of him. So he's got 4 sauces out of various heat levels to enjoy on all your various foods, but also for anybody who is already following his socials, our socials, or is about to be, newly announced partnership with Slayer.
Oh yeah.
Coney Island
burning to fire.
Oh yeah, Coney Island Saucery does have a Slayer brand hot sauce coming out very, very soon. And so make sure that you check that out for all your various levels of spice. This is Vampire and the Devil, Coney Island Saucery. Horns up. Fangs out. Devil, my friend, I think we should have a little quick conversation about everybody's respectful celestial abodes, where it be my little coffin, where I lay my head at night, or at times that you feel that you just want to go back down to make sure that hell's not getting out of whack while you are away. Let's talk about it. Vampire and Devil's newest partnership in Twisted Vines, our dear friends, Chris and Sarah and Cadaver.
Oh yeah, you like scary stuff, you like horror decor, come and check out Twisted Vines. They make all the kind of cool shit, all for your house, all kinds of scary shit. They love it. You like to bring back the horror, you want to scare your neighbors, you want to conjure up a friend to talk to, you want to conjure up somebody bad, you want to do some bad stuff to them, you go to Twisted Vines and get some of their merch.
Absolutely, for sure. Everything is completely handmade by them. So if you need a little friend, maybe a round set abode, maybe you want to conduct a little evil towards a friend that was a friend, maybe no longer a friend. They have voodoo dolls they can do for you to allow for such activities. But you know how much we love our Ouija boards, my friend, and they make all of those by hand. They took care of your beloved vampire with a nice Nosferatu board, but the devil, he happens to be a Munsters fan. And not only do they do boards as traditional rectangles, but they can put a little bit of coffin flair in them.
Oh yeah, look at that coffin shape Munster board. Yeah, you wanna conjure up Mr. Herman? You wanna ask him how Pet Cemetery was? You can do it on this board. Oh yeah.
Absolutely, my friend. So again, thank you so much to Twisted Vines for partnering with the Vampire and Devil podcast, and make sure that you Fangs and Infernos are checking them out on their Facebook page, on their Instagram pages, and making sure that you are checking them out as they move around the country, showing their craft off at all of the various horror cons and oddities expos that they love to do. So absolutely, my friend, of course, man, horns up, fangs out for our friends at Twisted Vines.
Oh, yeah. Hey, it's the Devil here, and we're gonna continue talking about devilish things and the devils in movies. This time we're going a little bit of a musical, should I say? Wow, yeah! The devil loves this music. You know, the devil made rock and roll. It's the devil's music. Oh, yes, it is. And we're gonna talk about the devil. Oh, yeah, I love talking about the devil. And we're gonna talk about this movie, maybe with the one with Jack Black in it. Ooh, it's called Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny. Have you seen this yet? Oh, yeah, it's got it all. It's got a little kid from Kickapoo. It's got Ronnie James Dio. It's got Meatloaf in it. It's got everything you want in a movie. It's got breaking into the rock and roll history museum. It's got a Sasquatch in it. It's got the devil. And guess who plays the devil? Oh yeah, Mr. Dave Grohl from Nirvana and the Foo Fighters. Oh yeah. And it's got the greatest song ever wrote. But this is not it. It's just a tribute. Anyway, if you want to go see a cool rock and roll movie that's got the devil in it, go check it out. Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny.
So, Devil, my friend, this is going to be an interesting conversation. We're going to get a little musical. We're going to get quite bloody, but we're also going to get insanely devilish, which I know that you like. I know that's something that you definitely enjoy, and also is something you're incredibly unapologetic for. But, my friend, you know I love you, and I wouldn't have it any other way, my friend. So let's get into this showdown that we've got going, my friend, as we kind of battle it out with some devilish/evil musicals, where we had an early conversation of some movies that we thought would work well for this, but we're also going to tie in with some future fun. So we decided to go a different route, go a little bit more obscure, but definitely very cult favorite, as we pit Repo, the genetic opera, up against the Devils Carnival. And I mean, hallelujah, it's going to be an interesting conversation. So I say we get right into that, my friend. Repo, the genetic opera, and the Devils Carnival.
Oh yeah, we figured, if we're gonna pair some horror musical, why not pair it together with the pair that put the pair together, and with Terrence and Darren Bousman's projects of Repo, and then later on with the Devil's Carnival and the Devil's Carnival 2. So it's like, why not? We can do musicals. There's a lot of other musicals that we could have done and we could have picked. And, obviously the main one we probably would have picked would have probably either, more than likely been Rocky Horror Picture Show. People are like, why are you doing Rocky Horror? And trust me, if we put Rocky Horror against anything, it's pretty much going to lose.
Nothing's beating it.
And and I know that's a bold statement, and you know how much me and the devil love Lost Boys, but I would even go as far as saying that Rocky Horror Picture Show even beats Lost Boys in a showdown.
We'll talk about that. That maybe you and the devil love Lost Boys, but remember, it's you against the vampire.
but anyway, yeah, that's why we decided to just pair these movies together, because it's sort of a family affair. We have the same writers, same directors, a lot of the same cast that are in all three of these movies, so it's like we might as well just keep it in the family.
Absolutely, because in reality, if we were keeping it stylistically similar, the only quality horror-ish musical that could go up against Rocky Horror Picture Show, again, in my opinion, the Fangs and Infernos might think otherwise, would probably be a Little Shop of Horrors. If we're looking simply stylistically, like what parts are bloody versus what parts aren't, that's probably the best showdown stylistically that we could possibly have in that way. But again, nothing's going to take out Rocky Horror Picture Show, because while you might look at other musicals as bloody horror musicals and people will be like, well, that should win because that's just the way, and it checks all the boxes. Rocky Horror, from the style of the music, what it did back then, and the life it lives now with the not just rabid cult following that it's got, as well as the multiple lives it continues to live in different facets. It just has way too much ammunition. Whether you think it checks all the boxes or not, honestly, it's just irrelevant. But yes, let's keep it in the family, my friend, as we start off with Terrence's, Repo, the Genetic Opera, along with Darren, of course. This has always been a favorite of mine. This is the movie that I thought would work best for this. And everything about this movie I really, really like. And the funny thing is, too, it's the first movie I ever saw. And I think it's just about, if not still, the only other movie besides the Saw series that's actually put on by Twisted Pictures, which I always found to be really, really interesting. But anyway, Repo the Genetic Opera, it's a very, very simple concept, but I really think they do everything very, very well. And basically, it's in a time where just organ failure, pandemic is just taking over the world, and a company called GeneCo comes in where they basically, have artificial everything, with, hearts, spines, lungs, probably brains, but the fact of the matter is they can repair you and put in an artificial, organ for you to allow you to continue to live your life. But just like any other thing, whether it be a car, a mortgage, or even other surgeries, you have payments that you have to make. And if you miss a payment, they literally send a repo man to come out and take their property back. A guy who just straight up kills you, rips out your spine or takes out your heart or removes your stomach. I mean, it's pretty cool. It's not exactly it's not an overall original concept. The idea of artificial appendages or an epidemic that takes over. That part's not so much original. That has been done before. But one of the things I've always loved about this movie is the ideas behind it, and the execution of how it's done, especially as a musical, I think is very ahead of its time. And I do think to a certain degree, it's also pretty unmatched.
Yeah. I mean, especially with the fact, you added in, not only is it just a musical, it's a more of a metal, rock musical, where most musicals, tend to not usually go that route. Most musicals are, classic music or anything like that. I mean, you had a few rock ones, like Rock of Ages and things like that. But like for the most part, when you think of musicals, you kind of think of more of like, Phantom of the Operas with the opera stuff or things like that. Where I like, that's what I love about Repo the Genetic Opera, because it's like, not only is it a musical, it the title even says opera, and it's definitely has a very operatic feel to it. Not only in reality, because there is a part where in the movie where people are at an opera and they have an opera singer. I mean, just the whole feel of the movie from beginning to end has that kind of drama like an opera does, where you have your characters and you find dilemmas and you find like backstories and stuff like that. So it definitely has that feel to it, but with a more modern twist and stuff like that. And that's what I love. That's what I love about the movie. And like, as I said, not even just like with the actors. It kind of reminds me a lot of like we've talked before with Rob Zombie stuff, where he brings a lot of like actors and stuff like that who have maybe haven't done movies in a long time, or old school people and people you wouldn't assume to like do like that, and then throws them into the mix. You got like Paul Sorvino being like the the main guy from Jinko. You got Bill Moseley in it. Obviously everybody knows from Chop Top, but also all the Rob Zombie movies and stuff like that. You got Nivek Ogre, which everybody in the musical world knows, from all his time doing all the stuff with Skinny Puppy and stuff like that. But then you kind of throw in the mix. They, at least in the movie version, they throw in a mix, which was popular and unpopular at the same time with with them throwing in Paris Hilton, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, a lot of people kind of take away from Paris Hilton. I was never really a huge Paris Hilton fan in general because I just never really liked that whole social media. I'm a rich mommy daddy kind of like person and stuff like that. Just like the whole fakeness and stuff like that. I did like the fact that that she had put herself into these like horror films and stuff like that, like House of Wax and stuff like that. But like this movie, I think was as much as I it painfully was like, oh God, Paris Hilton's in this movie. I think she's probably one of the break roles for me in this movie. I think she did such an amazing job in this movie and stuff like that, and just the way she played it and the way she was just like gung ho to just basically kind of drop this like sort of persona, but then again, she's playing a persona that she's kind of sort of based off because everybody knows her as like like I said, Paris Hilton is the daughter of the Hilton heads and expect lavishly and wants this and wants that, and she's like really spoiled brat playing into basically almost the same kind of character again, where she is a spoiled brat. She's this daughter of a multi-millionaire billionaire guy who's owns Jinko, but then she also plays with the with the body image horror and stuff like that, which applaud her throughout the whole entire movie as far as like her kind of like sort of taking a role that's kind of similar to what she's done in social media in real life, but then kind of blown it over to the other side where it's like to the absurdity of it. So it's such a cool iconic role that she put herself into.
Absolutely. And I mean, the idea of the movie, too, is so basically, for a little bit of storyboard info for the Fangs and Infernos, is it's a movie that's also based around the ideas of lies, deceit, and treachery, which I absolutely love. It's one of my really strongest arguments when it does come to this movie in general being as good as it is it's again not about the fact that those concepts haven't been used before, but the intertwining of these concepts are done so seamlessly that I really, really like it. But anyway, the side story behind Roddy Largo owning Gene Co. and aiding the world's organ failure is you've got Shiloh and her father, basically single dad. So when it comes to this movie, one of the things I love about it is while you've got, Ronnie Largo, his story of the idea of like, owning Jinko and taking care of the world's, epidemics and organ failure, you've got Shiloh and her father. Her father's a single father whose, wife died giving birth to Shiloh. And he's kind of one of these sort of wreck of a man kind of things where he becomes overly protective of his daughter and doesn't want to lose her in any way because he's still recovering from, the loss of Marnie and everything like that. But also, leads his daughter to kind of believe that she's like sick when she isn't, which is also a concept that has happened in real life and even so much as somewhat recently as well in real life news. So, Shiloh is very, very, kept under wraps. She's still growing up. She's a young teenager. She kind of wants to explore, live her life, but she knows that like she has to kind of lie to her father. She can't be caught, in this way or the other way. Her father living that double life of being the repo man who's under the thumb of Roddy Largo to go and collect Gene Co. property. But the funny thing is that the reason why his wife died in reality that you do find out is because Ronnie Largo poisoned her, but made it seem as though, Nathan is the one who actually killed his wife. And that was the story that was always built. So, Ronnie is still this insane just puppet master of just pulling the strings and making everybody dance. And, Nathan doesn't want Shiloh to know about this evil life that he lives while looking out for his daughter, but sheltering her. And then you've also kind of got the third corner of the triangle in Blind Mag, who's a performance artist, in the opera, who's very well respected, very well loved, that Shiloh is a huge fan of in general, but doesn't know until later that, that's also her godmother. She was best friends with Marnie, but again, with Nathan trying to conceal Shiloh so much, she never even tells Shiloh she has a godmom, and then Mag never even knows that Shiloh's alive for a lot of the times, because she was always told she was dead until she saw her in person, just kind of as a flash when she was kind of rebelling out. So I've always loved the idea of this movie, that kind of triangle of the three different stories of which they storyboard it in the movie, be like this person's story, that person's story, and just the very seamless transition of lies, deceit, and treachery, which I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, you throw it all in the mix, and, of course, one of the writers, of this, Terrence, is gonna throw himself the greatest bone of all, and rightfully so. You know what I mean? Like, his performance in this movie is epic, but he gives himself, the grave robber role,
Best
which
character in the movie.
which is like the best character in the movie. Exactly, he's just like the funnest character. It's like that. He's got like the best songs that are in the movie, I believe, and it's just things like that where it's just like his character is just like kind of like sort of the narrator of this whole, like, this whole business of everything, and he just basically talks about how, like, with his character, that everybody who's kind of, gone under these surgeries and stuff like that, they use this thing called Zydrate, which basically is like this, like, kind of pain reliever kind of thing that you shoot up, and it kind of gets you get you ready for surgery so that you can do it, but you can also extract it from all the dead people that have been killed by the repo. So he's like, he's basically selling it on the black market. So you have his character throughout the whole entire time, which is just fun because he's just like this, like, mischief character that's just like, they got their people going around the graveyard and stuff like that, making sure that people aren't grave robbing. And he's, obviously, like I said, like we said, this is a musical. So, 99% of the time, everybody's singing throughout this whole entire movie. And it's just like, he's talking about, he's getting ready to start singing, and the grave people are coming, the police are watching, and he's over here just singing like graves, and he's like screaming really, really loud. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's a good way to not get caught.
Well, he's doing
Talk
an
about
illegal activity.
yeah, yeah. It's like, yeah, we will kill and murder any grave robbers on the spot. Hey, I'm over here. I'm grave robbing.
Which is hilarious too, because at one point in the movie he stumbles across this just massive underground tomb of bodies. Like, basically it's like, oh my god, like, I'll be able to, I'm about to become a millionaire myself, because I've got endless supplies of Zytrate now, because there's like, 200 bodies in this place. But still part of the song, he's singing it all like sinister and quiet. My job is to steal and rob graves. And it's like, okay. And then sure enough, right after he hits that note, like, you got people like the Secret Service type SWAT team busting in the doors and through the windows to try to catch him, and he flees, and they catch Shiloh. But at the same time, it's like, well, yeah, way to also tell them where this thing is, them now knowing. It never plays out that way, but you still can't help but wonder, be like, way to, like, basically show them an area that they should just keep somebody on guard now, because they know you're going to want to come back to it.
Yeah.
It's super duper crazy. But there's also a great secondary story that kind of piggybacks off of what you were saying, Devil, about the whole, like, heiress type thing, is that Ogre, Bill, and Paris's characters are all fighting over who's going to take over GeneCo, because they also know that their father's not going to live forever. Their father also, Roddy, he also does happen to be very sick, with a, basically with a terminal illness that even he can't cure, which is funny because it's also in one of his songs that he does straight up. He's like, who would have thought that, like, a guy that, created this giant empire can't even stop his own extinction, but I can go out with a bang. I think it's a great lyric in one of Roddy's songs. And it's super duper cool. But yeah, you get these three people who are all, fighting over it, where you've got Paris's character who's addicted to the knife. She's all about surgery, so all about changing her appearance. You've got Bill Moseley's character who's just so hot-headed, and anything that goes wrong, he's just going to blow up at. And you really don't want somebody like that in charge of the company. You kind of don't want somebody like Paris's character in charge. While she does seem to be a little bit more business savvy, it doesn't really change the fact that like she's constantly changing her appearance, and you don't really know like how to take her as seriously when you don't really. It's kind of like the idea of like, how comfortable can you be at a job where the person who signs your checks, keeps changing. And then you've got Ogre's character, who's really just more of this like crazy face changing but like womanizing type character, where he's this kind of like overly feminine but like kind of sex driven character, where you really just kind of can't take him overly seriously at all as a businessman, because he just seems like he would just be, off in the corner just fucking all day when like real decisions have to get made. So they've been fighting throughout the entire movie on exactly who is the right heir to take over the company. And of course, Roddy's like, look, you all are fucking idiots. Like, I kind of can't stand any of my children. You all are ridiculous. So you've got just another kind of layer to the story as it builds towards the overall climax of it with, Shiloh finding out things, learning about Blind Mag, wanting to go to the show, and also Roddy kind of summoning her to go to these places to really, learn about the secrets, because Roddy ultimately wants Shiloh to take everything over, and Shiloh doesn't know anything about that world.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting, like you were talking about with the whole like, it's like, who do you give the company to? It's like, that's what I love about that part of the movie, was it's like, it's like, all my children are freaking freaks of nature and are horrible people. Like, I'm not gonna give it. And each one of them thinks that they're the one that's gonna get it. You know what I mean? Like, I love it. And Bill Moseley's character in this, when he's his overtly overness of like just wanting to cut things up and cut people open, and he's like, he likes fucking, so he'll put he's like, the one line, he's like, yeah, I'll carve a hole and fuck it or something like that.
Yeah,
where
like the
he's
one
like,
girl bumps into him, like spills his coffee, and he just pulls out a knife and just stabs her to death. And everybody else is just kind of watching him do it, like, that's just Bill.
Yeah. And then, like you said, with Paris, like all of a sudden, with her being addicted to the knife, which leads into, them talking more about her story, which goes into one of the other songs that the grave robber gets to sing, which has the one best, which is like, talks about Zydrate and talks about how it comes in a little glass vial, and it has Paris Hilton into it and stuff like that, into that mix of that song. And it's just like it's just a great like atmosphere of this, because it's like like I said, the whole imagery of this is very like, like post-apocalyptic, what I mean? It's like end of the world type thing and stuff like that. But it's just it's just like the imagery and stuff like that is just so great. And then like, mixed in with like being a musical, especially with myself, because I'm like, a lot of people might not know, but the devil loves musicals. He doesn't wear Prada, but he loves musicals. You know what I mean? I'm a huge fanatic of musicals, all types of musicals, like I said, not even just the horror related ones, and stuff like that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of like Newsies and things like that. So anything that does with musical, although I still do laugh about it, you know what I mean, the whole entire time. You're doing musicals, you're singing a song, and it's like, why does everybody know this dance? Why is everybody choreographed and stuff like that? I always laugh about it, but I mean, that's the beauty of a musical. But yeah, with this one, I think it's just great when it gets into that climatic, like I said, with Shiloh learning and stuff like that. Although, like I said, I mean, at least in my opinion, and it's not really necessarily not necessarily a bad thing. And like I said, it's not really the actress, because I love her, but I always felt like Shiloh is probably like the weakest character in this whole entire like movie, because she's just, I mean, I get it. She's, this, teenage girl, angst girl that just wants to kind of rebel out and kind of see things and stuff like that. But I mean, she's got one of the most annoying songs in the whole entire movie. The only good part of that whole entire song is you get You get Joan Jett for a quick second, so that's kind of cool. She kind of comes out of nowhere and plays. But yeah, I think out of all the songs, she kind of gets the most of her songs are kind of like the weakest. And like I said, I mean, as far as that, like I said, like I said, I love her. I love the character itself. It's just that that whole like whininess. It's like, oh god, yeah, okay. She's like, I'm sick. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No cares. It's like it's always going like that. But I love how it just leads her into this dark world, and she goes into that stuff like that, and then then it goes into the final opera where everybody testifies.
Yep. No, for sure. And it's crazy too, because like when it comes to the music of this movie, just in general, they are so over the top with it. I mean, it's nearly 60 overall songs between lyrics and instrumentals. It's pretty damn insane for a movie that's like, just over an hour and a half long. I mean, they really pack it in music wise, which I really like and I can really appreciate. But yeah, ultimately, as we make our way to the climax and to the obituaries, is the fact that we're getting to the final opera where everybody's testifying, and you're getting this combination of like real life death, that it takes a second for the crowd to also realize that this is actually happening. It's like when you're at like a horror fest that's got people in costumes and like zombies or this, that, or the other thing, where you could like stab somebody and have somebody like walking bleeding and people aren't necessarily going to think that something is wrong. But you've got Blind Mag, who can't live this life, and Roddy kind of knows that she's kind of rebelling against her and has secrets that she can spill. And, Mag ends up, taking out her eyes, which are incredibly powerful and can not only like see the past and the future, but aids her overall, performance piece. I mean, Sarah Brightman is absolutely phenomenal in that role. And, impales her eyes as basically like a fuck you to the establishment, but then they kill her for it because she's being suspended, and they cut her ropes and she ends up impaling and dying. You've got, Nathan, who ends up, dying on the final scene as he's confessing everything to Shiloh, that he only ever wanted to look out for her. All of the Roddy's children survive while Roddy passes and Shiloh flees. And that's one of the craziest endings to it, but also mixed with a very interesting question where you are wondering where or when or how the sequel to this movie would happen, which you don't get, but is also going to be part of the follow-up to the continuation of the showdown. Is, Terrence closes out the movie as the gravedigger, basically telling everybody like, hey, here's the situation. Gene Co does live on. It is ultimately taken over by Paris, where it does seem like the brothers simply fall in line, and Paris does become the face of of Gene Co, and he's like, well, here's the thing, the king is dead, but the queen has fled, in reference to Shiloh, as she's basically runs off and is tentatively never heard from again. The children take over Gene Co, and then it kind of leaves it at that, like, who knows what's going to happen as everybody prepares for surgery and so on like that. But the funny thing is Repo is technically it's the first of the trilogy, but it's what was supposed to be the middle of an overall trilogy that didn't ultimately end up playing out that way. But it's such a cool movie, and I've always really, really enjoyed it. So getting into the obituaries when it comes to this movie, like I said, the idea of like epidemics, organs failures, things like that, and rock operas are not uncommon. They've been done before. But this movie, I think, taps in a way that was very undone at the time. It was very, very new. It was barely into the 2000s when this movie came out. And I just really think it's excellent in its overall execution. There's a couple of pitfalls. They stub your toe in certain places. Like I said, Shiloh's character is incredibly important to the story. You really can't have it correctly without her. But yeah, her music, while it fits and it's actually proper for the character, they're very, very annoying. The 17th song, I've got a disease, stuff like that. They're kind of obnoxious in comparison to everybody else's songs. Like I said, the Gravedigger music is like, they're fantastic. It's probably the gold standard of the songs. Nathan's songs are really, really excellent, as are Roddy's as well. So overall, I do think the overall strength of this movie does cover up its weaknesses. And I do like this movie overall. Again, I think the triangle of main stories mixed with the seamless lies, deceit, and treachery angle is very, very well done. And I really don't think there's a lot that you can point at to overly judge about. We're always going to nitpick certain things. That's the purpose of our discussions. But overall, I really like this movie. I do hold it in high regard, and I think it's quite excellent. So for me, I really do give it a solid 8. I've always loved this movie since the first time I saw it.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. Like I said, it was just one of those ones that just kind of came out, and you watched it and you're like, oh my god, this is such an awesome movie, such a cool concept. I love the fact that this is Darren Bowsman, who is part of the Saw franchise. You had some people that were from the Saw franchise that have been in this movie. It also was in the next ones when we talk about that too. So I love how it's like that this such a like a close knit community and stuff like that, as far as when the productions of these this movie, and then like I said, continuing on with Devil's Carnival and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, like I said, yeah, I mean, there's definitely songs and characters that might not have been as great as other ones, but like I said, overall it's just it's such a great movie. It's got such a great movie flow, and it's like I said, it's one of those ones too where it's got such a huge we talk about with Rocky Horror Picture Show and the cult following. Repo has definitely had a huge cult following. Especially within the last few years, I've seen a kind of resurgence of it a lot more too now, where we see, we've gone to when we were at New Jersey Horror Con a couple times,
Yeah.
we've seen people dressed up in in their Repo outfits, and then we talked to the the one people who were there for their merch and stuff like that from New York. They were all dressed up in their Repo genetic opera kind of outfit. So it's kind of cool to see that this movie that's came out what, like almost 20 years ago or something like that, is still pretty much still living in people's hearts and stuff like that, and people are still read these characters, and they're still still loving to go see this movie and stuff like that. So it's like, it just tells you how well, not only was the movie, acted and stuff like that, but how well it was written and how well it was, directed, and, the visuals and stuff like that, where, it makes you keep watching it, and you can watch it over and over again and still have that satisfaction of watching it and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you when it comes to that. I'm a huge fan, especially like I said, of the just the whole atmosphere of it and stuff like that. I love the apocalyptic kind of feel to it and stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely agree with you with that 8.0 on the Repo, because like I said, it's the it's can up there in the gold standard with with those ones like Rocky Horror, with the Little Shops of Horror, with Sweeney Todd, as the best of the best when it comes to horror music and some movies and stuff like that. And at least with with Rocky Horror, it's kind of like a newer version of Rocky Horror, because Rocky Horror had that rock element, that heavy, kind of a metal element, where this movie definitely has that, with that little bit of touch of the industrial music and stuff like that too. But it's definitely like like I said, the Rocky Horror came out in the 70s. This is definitely like a 2000s film, so it's definitely like a newer take on Rocky Horror. It's two completely different movies. They're obviously, it's not like it's a remake or anything like that, but it's definitely kind of okay, well, we need something to fill in the shoes for Rocky Horror, that's more modern, and maybe more younger generations will like it and stuff like that, and then maybe they'll go back and watch Rocky Horror or something like that. So
no, and you're definitely right, Devil, for sure. So and I definitely think that's super duper cool, is the fact that, yeah, like Rocky Horror, Repo does have that following, does have those people that are really, really passionate about it. And just like you said, the last two New Jersey Horror Cons that we've been to, we've met, different people that have done Repo the Genetic Opera cosplays and stuff, and they've done them very, very well. And so it has that Rocky Horror feel to it, where that has definitely gotten its own life and its own legs. And I definitely love the way that the soundtrack puts together, for sure. So that's the way it's going to be, Fangs and Infernos. Repo, the Genetic Opera, collectively, we give it an 8.0, an 8 on the obituaries. And now we're going to continue into the continuation of our showdown. And you know how the devil doesn't like to play fair, Dick. But at the same time, this is a particularly cool series of movies. So as we had discussed before, we even decided to really get into the actual discussion here, is that it's a much interesting and cooler conversation as a trilogy than just pitting one movie right up against the other. And we're going to jump right now into the Devils Carnival, and I'm going to kick it over to Devil as we break it down. And this is a cool one, my friend. You know, basically people who go to hell but have to live out the sins that brought them there.
Yeah. So, you know, like normally, like I said, when we do these ones and stuff like that, you know, we do the 1 versus 1. And even with before we did we did the Halloween, you know, Trick or Treat versus Terrifier 1 and 2 with Art the Clown coming in and bringing in his tag team partner. I mean, this is sort of has that same feel, but for this one, I feel because the Devil's Carnival, especially the first movie, it's such a short film. It's considered to be too long to be a short film and too short to be considered a full feature film. So it's
Yeah.
kind of in that realm where like where do you really put it? So I think just for the sake of, you know, putting it together, I've always just was like, let's just put just one and two, so Devil's Carnival and Alleluia as a continuation, because it is a continual story.
Yes.
You know, it continues right on to each other. So it's, you know, it's in that same realm. So like I said, so it's kind of just like putting those two, like last time we did Terrifier 1 got a blah blah blah, Terrifier 2 got a blah blah blah. This time around, we're definitely gonna put Devil's Carnival and Devil's Carnival as mixed into one as one movie. So it's not really a 2-on-1. It's kind of like a 1.5 maybe on a 1 or something like that.
It's like an hour and a half, hour 45 movie against like kind of a 2.5 hour movie. So it's like
yeah.
in that comparison and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I always loved the Devil's Carnival. I'll tell you, Devil, like I bought that movie, like it's so funny because it's on my shelf, but it looks physically funny compared to everything else, because the copy that I have is the OG one that came out at like Hot Topic in like a CD book.
Yeah, because it had the soundtrack and it had the DVD together. That's the one I have.
Yeah, so it's so funny because you'll be looking at the C's on my shelf and it'll just be, you know, this movie, and then it'll be like, you know, because even DVDs and Blu-rays, obviously Blu-rays are shorter than DVD jewel cases, but, you know, it's not like a tiny little thing, but you literally just be like, no, pew, down and then back up as it continues with the rest of the C's. It's just really, really funny because, like, yeah, dude, like you said, man, just that was the way it was originally released. I know there's copies of that still floating around. As far as reprints of that movie, I haven't really done a lot of the follow-up on that because I've never needed to, but I assume you can get copies of the Devil's Carnival as regular releases. That probably did come in standard DVD cases. But yeah, it's just like that little like opening like kind of trio fold thing, like you said, with the soundtrack that, yeah, I picked up at Hot Topic way back in the day when that thing came out. And it was funny because that was a very under the radar movie, because even with Repo, it still gripped people. I still have my Repo t-shirt that I bought at a store like way the hell back. And Devil's Carnival was that same kind of thing. It just kind of appeared very quietly. It really didn't have a huge buildup or any kind of major conversation. You know, back in like the early Facebook days, like if you were a fan of Repo, you kind of knew it was coming. If you followed Repo's, you know, pages, socials, like carefully, you would see that it was a thing. But as just a casual horror fan, even if you liked Repo, Devil's Carnival was a very easy movie for you to just miss completely, and then find out, and then you could have found out about this thing like 5 years later when Alleluia was coming out, which got a little bit more attention as a full length, to then be like, wait, Alleluia is not the sequel? There was one in between somewhere? Where the hell was I? Well, that's really not a discredit to anybody that did happen to. It was just that this was just a very quiet release that you really had to be on top of it, or it could have just gotten away from you.
Yeah, you had kind of a lot of it had to be within the know. Like, so, precursor to before the Devils Carnival came out, we were at a convention one time, and Vec Ogre was there, and we were talking to him, telling him how much we love his music, being huge Skinny Puppy fans and stuff like that, but also
Yep.
a huge Repo the Genetic Opera fan. And that's when he told us a little secret about there's a movie coming in that's kind of hush hush that I'm gonna be in, that within the next couple of months, if you follow this website, which was the devilscarnival.com or probably something to the extent like that, it would eventually, you would go down this path and eventually kind of like how Rob Zombie's 3 from Hell was doing for a little while, where you get a little glimpse and stuff like that of different
Yep.
things. He was like, you'd go on this website and it, like, whenever anything new would come up, it'd pop up and be like, oh, boom, bam, it's going to be this, bam's going to be in this movie, bam's going to be this. And it had like little interactive things. So yeah, so it got the little scoop about knowing that, that this movie was going to come out. But yeah, when it came out, it had like a little really small release as far as that. I remember when the second one, Hallelujah, came out, it had more of a theatrical release. They actually had a tour,
Yep.
with Terrence and Bousman both being there, and they showed it, and then had a Q&A afterwards, and I got to go see that when it came to Baltimore and stuff like that. I got tickets to go see that. So it was like, yeah, that was like kind of like in that hush hush kind of like
Yeah.
realm. Like, oh, you like Repo the Genetic Opera? Wait till you see this new thing. And then, like I said, and it's great because, like I said before, even precursoring into the Repo, that it's that those guys kind of remind me of like the Rob Zombie-ish, where they use a lot of the same characters. You have Paul Savino back in this movie. You know what I mean? He's playing sometimes he's known as God, and
Yep.
Hallelujah, he's considered maybe called they call him the author a lot in that one, but it's basically Paul Savino is playing God, which is just cool. And then, just like we were talking about in Repo, where, Terrence has like one of the coolest lines and the coolest makeup and just like the cool music
He's
in the
he's the
movie.
coolest character again.
He's like, well, yeah, man, I'm the writer and producers and do all this stuff like that. I the one does the hard work. I'm putting on this devil persona, and I love the fact that he just was like, yeah. And then like I said, precursor into that, for people who don't know what the Devil's Carnival about, like you said, it's basically a tale of three different strangers that have all had some bad mishaps in their life and stuff like that, and find themselves into hell. One was not too good of a choosing of who they wanted to be with their partners, and was with an abusive partner that ended up killing her. You had another one that was a thief that just wanted everything and taking everything and always taking, and takes too much stuff, and the cops find her and kill her in a shootout. And then you have another character, which is really cool because a lot of people will know him from the Boondock Saints. Mr. Sean Patrick Flannery is in the house, and he's a father who just lost his son. His son got into an accident and got killed and stuff like that. So he's a grieving father of losing his son, and ultimately takes his life. But within the three of these things, they're going down into this hell area, which is considered like sort of like a carnival. You have the people who are going to be in it, like them, the souls, and then you have the carnies, and the carnies are sort of, they're in hell, but they're also characters that the devil kind of chose as like, okay, I want you as part of my entourage, this stuff like that. But ultimately, when it comes into the movie and you start figuring out stuff, it's all about these three tales. And the three tales are the three people that you talk about, but it's also based off of Aesop's fables,
Which I
which I'm a
love.
huge fan of. As far as like, when it comes to like fables and fairy tales and things like that, between Aesop's and the Brothers Grimm's, those guys were always my favorite as far as like horror fairy tales and cautionary tales about things, and that's what this is all about.
No one did it better than Aesop and Grimm. Like, of course, there's other histories of fairy tales or situations. Like you can look at stuff like the Odyssey or the Iliad, dealing with like Medusas and sirens and things like that. But as far as like commitments to fairy tales and that kind of stuff, you're right, Devil. I'm going to continue right with you, man. But yeah, nobody did it better than Aesop and Grimm.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so you have you have the story, and he's you have the devil's characters reading this stuff, and he's reading the basically the tales of like that. You have the scorpion, the frog. You have the the story about which is basically like her character is like this girl that just trusts people way too much, and you have the scorpion character that once he's luring her in, and he's basically trying to get her to come with him, and oh, join my carnival, I need you in my act. I'm gonna throw knives at you, and it's like, trust me, I'm that. And it's basically like in the story of the scorpion and the frog, it's the frog was trying to go, they were stuck in the water, and they were trying to get across this water, and then the scorpion was like, oh yeah, you can trust me, and ultimately you can't trust the scorpion. He's gonna prick, and
Yep.
I love how they just add that into the story. In this movie, you have that with the songs, you have the scorpion, the scorpion's tail. And like I said, just like with Repo, I love the fact that they, not only did they add more the same characters. Bill Moseley's in this character, is in the movie again. He's considered the musician, which I think he's just a weird, kooky, perverted guy. I don't know what his character really is. He's really odd. He's got like the pencil mustache, like like John Waters sort of.
Yeah,
He's a
it's
very
very strange. Like, Repo meets Otis Driftwood because he's this like sexually driven deviant, but again, yeah, he's got this kind of je ne sais quoi about him. Very strange.
yeah, and then they add a couple of extra ones, and some of the ones that I really love because the fact that they being another movie that's considered a musical, in this movie, so why not bring any more new musicians? I mean, obviously Nevek uh comes back into it. He's basically this cool guy that he's called the twins. He basically can shapeshift himself and basically make himself look like any person that he wants to, and kind of does his devious things that he does. But they also added a couple extra flair to it. A lot of people don't know that, in this movie, if you've seen it, you have a guy that kind of, you have the guy that kind of pulls out the duties of being like the guy who has to like do the whipping or do the punishing and stuff like that in this movie, and that's played by Clown from Slipknot, Sean. So that was kind of cool adding him. And then obviously anybody who's seen the movie, they talk about the dog and the pennies in the water and stuff like that. And Ivan Moody from Five Finger Death Punch, and was in Motor Grader at one time, plays the hobo, the clown, which I just think is great. And like I said, you also have the Alexa who played Shiloh
Yep.
in Repo. She comes back in it. So like I said, he takes a lot of like those same actors that he's worked with before and knows they can do very well, and especially actors and stuff like that too. Because I remember like even when Repo came out, people were talking to Bill and being like, oh yeah, that's kind of understandably with some of these other people, they've had music in their careers, and a lot of people will be like, well, I don't understand, Bill, why would you be chose for that? People didn't realize that Bill Moseley is a musician too.
Yep.
He had his band for a little while. He's done stuff with Buckethead and stuff like that, so it's like he's also
Phil Anselmo.
yeah, he's done stuff with Phil and stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense why he would be in this. And like I said, with some of the other ones, you can definitely tell. Even with even when with Sean Patrick Flannery's character, Sean's really not known for being a musical person, but he can carry a tune. So I love how the fact that in this that he's obviously singing his his song and stuff like that about his son and in this movie. But yeah, I just love the fact that they're going to add a little bit more musicians into the mix of the Devil's Carnival. But like I said, it has that same kind of look. It's just dark and dirty, and it's grimy, and it's hell, but it's not really exactly what you would consider hell because it's a circus, and it's definitely got that kind of feel to it. But I just love the atmosphere of it, and like I said, the storyline of them going further and further into the Aesop fables.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one of the things I also thought was really cool about the way that they did the Devil's Carnival is that it does well as a standalone, like 1 hour, semi short film. You know, it's a cool concept, it's a cool story. But like Repo, it gives you that feeling of wanting more. And again, we've never gotten a sequel to Repo, which has so much opportunity to to fill holes. And I don't mean holes in like the bad way where you're just looking like, oh my God, look at all these plot holes. They just fucked everything up. It's like, no, it's like curiosities. Like, what happened to Shiloh? Where really did she go? Did she settle down, just get married and have 6 kids and just living a happy, life, Does the grave robber just continue kind of doing his thing? What happened with Jinko? Does Paris just become this ultimate power player, or do her like inadequacies end up just burying the company completely? So there's a lot of curiosities when it comes to that. Same thing with the Devil's Carnival. I like the fact that they focused on like 3 specific like Aesop fables while also moving them into the ideas of like, the deadly sins and mistakes that you made during your life. And it could have been left at that, but also with that strength of curiosity and leading you to want more. And in this case, when it comes to the devils, as in, the devils, whatever, ... the Devil's Carnival leads you into getting the more that you were wondering if you would get. But then, just like you said, they were much more about the promotion, the tour. I remember that Baltimore tour that came through. I wanted to be there as well. I just had another commitment that I had to do. But it was a very, very cool thing that they did this promotional press tour, specialty like film showing of this movie, because it's very, very cool. It definitely has strengths to it as a full movie experience. And as we move into Alleluia, it continues on with those characters where certain things are killed off and I only mean it as continued, but there's main characters that you get to learn about as they continue into the next phase, which I thought was so strong.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, that's probably like my favorite part of the ending of the Devil's Carnival was the ending. You know what I mean? It was just like, they talk about it, you have the guy that's like the rules, and there's rules, and hell has rules, and there's things you got to follow, and you got to do that. And with his character, with Sean Patrick Flannery's character, obviously he committed a sin. He killed himself. He's trying,
Yeah.
but throughout this whole entire, he cut his wrists. And throughout this whole entire movie, he keeps on trying to find his son. He keeps seeing little glimpses of his son, and he's chasing him. And eventually, he gets to the devil's lair and finds out that it was never his son. It was always just images, or like the fool playing it. The guy playing the fool playing him, stuff like that. And so he's like, give me back my son. He's like, well, I didn't kill your son. Your son's an innocent. I don't kill children. That's his territory. That's not my territory. You know what I mean? Like that. Yeah. So he's like, you know what? But I'm gonna let you go. And and he basically sends him up the ladder and lets him go to heaven. And everyone's looking around like, well, you let one of them go?
Right.
He's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, but he's a sinner. Like, yeah, he paid the ultimate price. He killed himself, which in the eyes of people who are religious, that's the ultimate sin is killing yourself. That's automatically straight to hell. No, no collecting $200. Straight
No
to
passing
jail.
go.
Yeah. So you know what I mean. So to let them go, he's kind of just like breaking these rules, and you see him climb out and into the room with God, and Paul's like, what, God's character, Paul is like, what the hell's going on here? Where'd you come from? And then all of a sudden, it's basically them leading. He's like, hey man, we're gonna do this charge, man. We're gonna mess around with some shit. We're gonna change some rules, and we're gonna bring hell into the heavens area. And that's where basically it goes into Hallelujah. You know what I mean? It's basically the trains going into it. Basically, the premise of this movie, a lot of it is this battle between heaven and hell, and he's basically taking these sinners and these people who are not supposed to be in heaven and bringing them into heaven through like a back door or like through these like side doors that people don't realize that are what it is and stuff like that. But also it's cool too because it's, not only is this movie, like I said, a continuation. You have the thief that was in a Marywood's character is continually on to this movie, and she's being interrogated in heaven. But it also interspices, it's a little bit of a prequel too, because it interspices a character that we've met previously in Devil's Carnival, which was Emily Autumn's character, the painted doll.
Love her character too.
Yeah, and I loved her character, and you found out a little bit more about her, where it was like a precursor into like her joining Heaven's ranks and the very beginning of the the whole thing and stuff like that, and she's doing this, and eventually you find out that she's a little mysterious and a little mischievous, and she likes doing things and questioning things that you're not supposed to do. And she kind of ties in with one of God's number one right hand guy that does a lot of the stuff. They kind of get romantically involved and stuff like that. So you hear the story of her, basically with them, and she's wanting to read these books that are forbidden. And by that time he was like, yeah, I can't. She gets cast down into hell, and then eventually you find out that that's who she was. She the painted doll, and you find out about her character. But that's what the cool thing about this one too. It's like while you're in heaven and stuff like that, you kind of there's this perceived notion that the devil and hell is bad people. Ooh. But then you find out that actually the inner workings of the people in heaven are actually more vicious and more brutal and more unforgiving than hell. You find out that heaven is that. And then, like I said, so you get into that story, and then it's like like with Devil's Carnival, you had a couple of the characters and stuff like that that came back. Obviously with Hallelujah, you still have some more. You have all the carnies that are basically coming back, except for I think there was like two of them that didn't show up. Ivan doesn't come back, Hobo the Clown.
Yeah.
But they also intertwine more musicians in this movie. It's kind of like whenever Zombieland came out, nobody wanted to do Zombieland. And when Zombieland did really big, everybody wanted to be in Zombieland too. So it was like kind of like this. I don't think it was that way. I don't think they were like, oh no. I think it's just because with Hallelujah they had a bigger budget, so they could probably reach out to a lot more musicians, and they bring a lot more people in. That they bring in some great freaking people. I mean, there's at one point the Butcher Babies, Heidi and Carla are both in
You
it.
poor man.
You know what I mean? So you have them, you have Brie Grant, who's like the beginning of that person like that. I mean, you have one of my favorite characters in the movie, which are like the gumshoe detective guys. They're like, hey, they're talking like this the whole time. Yeah, what are you talking about? And that's Jimmy Urine from Mindless Self-Indulgent and his girlfriend and stuff like that and stuff like that. So you have them. I'm like, this movie has everybody, man. Like I said, just to even start off with it, let me just precursor to this. You're gonna get your mind blown. I'm like, not only does this movie have like all those musicians and stuff like that, you got Tech Nine in this movie. Tech Nine, like really? That's crazy. Awesome. You got David Hasselhoff in this movie. I mean, the Hoff is in this movie, for freaking Christ. You got Barry Bostwick. Talk about Rocky Horror Picture Show. You got Brad himself in this movie. You got Ted Neely in this movie, who's got a weird thing in his ear, but everybody knows him from Jesus Christ Superstar. I'm like, it's insane the amount of people that they have in this movie, like throughout the whole entire time. You're just like, Jesus. I'm like, no, I mean, which makes sense. They're in heaven. Heaven has the bigger budget, so of course all the bigger stars are going to be in heaven, or parts of heaven's, heaven's people. But yeah, I thought it was awesome. Like whenever you watch this movie, you're just like, holy shit, there's so many freaking cool characters and cool cameos in this movie. You're just like, oh my god, this is so awesome. Versus like I said, you can definitely tell that they took that extra budget that they probably got from this one and amped it up to the billionth degree.
No, absolutely, for sure. And I always just think that's so cool too, because when you get movies that also have the ability to live those second, third, and fourth lives because of the people they appeal to. we started off the conversations talking about movies like Little Shop of Horrors and Rocky Horror Picture Show and how they've been able to live on not only just because they're strong, but because the way that they just attach to themselves multiple generations. You know, you and I have been fortunate enough to meet Tim Curry, and it's just so cool to watch how films continue on. And with something like Repo the Genetic Opera, which I feel is the strongest as far as the way it's connected with people, I've seen my fair share of Devils Carnival references, and people definitely like these movies and enjoy them, and they have those characters of like curiosity. You know, it's like just those Loki isms, that mischievous type of interest that makes you want to relive and see more of that. And that's what I really like about this movie. And I think with Repo doing what it did, the secrecy of the Devil's Carnival, which ultimately I think kind of allowed for the excitement of Alleluia coming out, is what also allowed, like you said with Zombieland, the cameos to really flourish. Because the one thing about certain established actors, it's not that they are turned off by pet projects. What turns them on is like the passion and the drive behind the people who are making them. You know, you and I have talked with, the people involved with the Forest Hills. That has an amazing cast. And it's a very, very intimate pet project that Scott did for that movie. But the names that he got involved in there, whether it was because they liked the script or the people they were working with, or just the drive behind Scott, can definitely allow to acquire talent. Where even he mentioned something like Edward Furlong, where it looked originally like it just wasn't going to happen. Then it turned into, well, I think we can get a cameo of him here, to then him becoming a main person in the movie. It really is just kind of about the way things are designed overall and the fuel behind the fire. And that's something I really like about the way that the Devil's Carnival is designed. And so what do you think about the overall stories and the way that they finish things off there, my friend, as we kind of make our way towards the collective obituaries of the Devil's Carnival and the Devil's Carnival Alleluia?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, with the ending of, with Alleluia, you have this onslaught of them bringing, you find out that the Merrywood character was actually Ogre's character, and he was shape-shifting, and then he shape-shifts into the right-hand man of God. So it's like that you got a sheep and a wolf in sheep's clothing kind of now in their mix. They had the blacksmith that was making weapons for everybody in hell because they're getting ready to to have this war and this battle between the heaven and the hell and stuff like that. And sort of like Repo, you know what I mean, where the end of Repo you were like, oh shit, we want more, and we haven't gotten anything. Same thing with Devil's Carnival. There was potential of a third one. Obviously, they were setting it up for as a third one because of the fight and stuff like that. But now it's kind of been on the back burner. I'm not quite sure. I know they've done a couple other projects instead. I don't know if it's be continuation, because it'd be kind of tough now, especially with with the main character Paul Sorvino, as playing God and author, has passed away now. So it'd be kind of tough to try to make another one with someone else not being, with someone else being God. Not that they couldn't play it off, because obviously, just like when Heath Ledger died in the Doctor of Parnassus and stuff like that in that movie, where he could change his appearance, so it made it easier for why Colin Farrell or somebody else came into the movie and kind of finished it. I mean, they could theoretically get somebody else to play God, and now God looks this way, because God could change probably how he looks regardless.
Yeah.
But it'll be tough, just because it's we're just so used to seeing Paul, and just Paul's mannerisms and just the way that he was in this movie. He played such a good, like I said, with him, and also in Repo and stuff like that, playing a lot, so it's like, but then again, like I said, so it kind of has that feeling where it's like, now, people who are maybe not fans of Repo, that were maybe saw Devil's Carnival first, maybe saw
Yeah.
Devil's Carnival 1 and Devil's Carnival 2, and now are like, oh man, so now they kind of understand like where the Repo fans have been for a while, where there's probably more than likely not going to be a continuation of those. I mean, who's to say? I'd hope so. I know there's been some talks behind the walls of something coming out. I know Terrence and Darren both did another tour for another project, which was like a Western sort of like mortician kind of thing. I can't remember the name of it, but I know at the time that they're doing that. So, but there has been some talks maybe about reviving, maybe going back into maybe a Devil's Carnival world, or maybe into a Repo genetics world. So I mean, let's hope. Like I said, or even like I said, even if they just do another project now, I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to seeing what they do, just because, I've liked the work that they've done so far. And like I said, with Devil's Carnival and Alleluia, like I said, I just think it's just a cool story, because it's just like, not only does it bring like the Aesop fables, and even with Alleluia's got a little bit of an Aesop fable. It's only got one in it, but it
Yeah.
talks about the horse and the dog, but apparently in the original fable it was called an ass, but I guess they was called the filly and the ass.
Yeah.
But they didn't really want to go that route, I guess, for some reason, because it would be too on the kind of note and cheek and bone. So that's why they did the filly and the dog instead. But it's basically about Emily Autumn's character, the painted doll, where she was in heaven and got outcasted because she thought differently than what you're supposed to, because like he says, and that's the devil says, he wants you to think and believe and do everything that he does. His word is the word. Even in Tech Nine song, he talks about the word is the word and the word is the law. And all these people basically are in heaven, and it's a nice place and it's beautiful, and they probably got like ample amount of food and there's entertainment, but you have to make sure you're not allowed. You're not allowed to say something. You're not allowed to look this way. You're not allowed to read certain books, because certain books are considered banned and things like that. So even though hell has rules, their rules are more of like a different kind of rules than where heaven's rules are more like do what I say or you'll be casted down, which is what ultimately Painted Doll's character was. She was just basically outcasted, and to their demise, she's got, and when she's having her revenge, you know what I mean? She brings the number one back, and he's in hell, and he's trying to persuade her, and he was like, man, I'm treated better down here than I was ever up there.
Yeah. No, absolutely, brother. As we move into the obituary, so we're doing Devil's Carnival and Alleluia as a combined score when it comes to those. So looking at the two movies, like, objectively, and combining them together, how do you look at their ranking for that? How would you score them out of 10, putting them together as one movie?
Like I said, as one movie, it's gotta be, like I said, because it's a continuation and stuff like that and things like that. So it definitely goes into play where it's like, you can argue that some parts of part one or part two are better, or some people might think that Alleluia was better, or some people might think that the original Dark Devil's Carnival was better and stuff like that. But you got to look at it, like I said, you got to look at it as a continuational story. So as a continuational story, like I said, to me, I'm like I said, objectively, I think understand that people are a bigger fan of Repo Genetic, and I like a lot of the stuff with the songs and stuff like that and the production of Repo. But I think ultimately, like story wise and character wise, I think Devil's Carnival plays a higher, because it's got such a better overall kind of storyline to it, where it's just like not quite what you think, and then all of a sudden, you have the devil side of it and then the God side of it, and kind of like you realize that, okay, maybe it's like that. And then, like I said, the fact that they intertwine the Aesop fables into these movies, which is like I said, are one of my favorite of all the like the Grimm stories and all these like kind of fairy tales. So like I said, I mean, overall, I think, entertainment wise and stuff like that. Oh yeah, Repo is definitely gonna be the one that's, the bigger name everybody knows. But
Sure.
I think but I think that Devil's Carnival like overall has just a better like I said, storyline, and with the characters and just like the whole theme of it, where it's a lot more inclusive, and it's something, and like I said, and it's something original, you know what I mean? Not saying that the Aesop factor fables and people haven't done things like that, but just like the whole premise of like, this carnival in hell, and then seeing heaven, and then kind of like the intertwining of like, good versus evil kind of like feel to it. So I mean, like I said, overall for me, like I said, I would score these higher, than most. But like I said, I mean, it's weird because it's such a it's such a like an odd placing, because like I said, to me,
It's
I
just a tough
think,
one.
yeah, because it's one of those ones where it's like, I don't want to score it too high, because then it's like, okay, why is he scoring this high versus like, this movie? And okay, yeah, that movie I'm gonna put, this movie is like, if I say it's like a 9, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm not saying that the Devil's Carnival is as good as those movies that I gave a 9, but like
Yeah.
objectively, like I said, if I give Repo an 8, I almost sort of have to still kind of go with that same guideline with Devil's Carnival, because I feel like Devil's Carnival and Hallelujah, especially combined together, is equally just as good as Repo the Genetic Opera when you combine them both together as a movie. So to me, I had to be objective, and I'm gonna go with an 8.0 on that, and to be on that same line as Repo the Genetic.
I'm definitely with you 100%. Those movies combined, objectively, honestly, and collectively, an 8 is where it needs to be. It's strong, it's proper. Um, Obviously, now we do like a little continuation discussion about how we want to do a victory. Now, here's the thing with this. If I'm being completely honest, and this is not my movie versus your movie, me looking for a victory, or vice versa. I think if I'm really being objective to who I think the victory would be to, it would be Repo. But here's the tricky thing about it, because ultimately, Devil, we might, in a few minutes, we might ultimately decide that a wash is just the way, and this might be one of those fight it out, both sides die kind of thing situation. I ultimately do look at Repo as a stronger standalone. While I love the intertwining of Aesop's fables and the characters of the Devil's Carnival, because I do think you ultimately can't deny that. The thing about Repo, specifically that story, the main triangle and the way it plays out, also with its consistent, at least from what we've seen, strength of the outside cult following it's developed, I do think gives it a little edge and strength in a victory. Here's the thing with the Devil's Carnival, those movies collectively, they build that story over 2 movies, and they do it so well with those characters, leaving you wanting more, but also kind of giving you what you wanted in that. Again, we are kind of still holding out for a third movie that I really don't think we're going to get. But the other reason why I do think that Repo sneaks it out is it's a very strong standalone where the Devil's Carnival and Hallelujah need each other. If we do Repo against Devil's Carnival, I think Repo wins outright. If we do Repo versus Hallelujah, man, that one's just 2 heavyweights fucking battling it out. And it could go either way if we kept it strictly to that. Doing it as a combination situation, which you kind of have to do, like we told the Fangs and Infernos, which is how we felt this was the proper way to do it. I do feel the fact that those two movies need each other, as opposed to having a one-on-one, is one of the reasons why I give and kind of stand by Repo as the victor, as a strong solo standalone, versus the two in the handicap match. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's so much strength, though, to the Devil's Carnival, and I do love those characters. Everything you said was correct. But I do think the strength of Repo by itself versus the fact that the Devil's Carnival and Alleluia need each other to build that overall strong story, which is so proper and so good, is the only reason why in this particular handicap match, I do think the solo movie squeaks out the victory. That's just kind of how I look at it. But how about yourself, my friend?
I mean, I definitely agree on the points and stuff like that. I think the main thing with Repo though is that you don't have. I mean, you look at Repo versus Devil's Carnival. Repo Genetic Opera, as far as character wise, you only have like 5 characters, really. I mean, you've got the grave robber that you can be. You can be the 3 kids, and you can probably be Blind Mag, and you can throw the Repo Man in
The
there.
Repo Man, yeah,
But you
absolutely.
don't really. But that's the thing is though, out of all those ones, and you got Largo, you got the dad, you got but okay, no one is cosplaying God or Paul Sorvino's Largo's character. No one, I've never seen anybody ever cosplay the the Repo Man. To me, it's always, and I think Bill Moseley's character is kind of like a little bit of a wash, where like most of the people that you see that tend to use, even on Shiloh's character, no one really even does really her character. It's that I think it's just the strength of Paris Hilton's and the Vec Ogres and then Blind Mags. Those are the 3 that you tend to usually see it. But like I said, overall, you have a couple of things. Where Devil's Carnival, there's so many characters that are so spread out that it's kind of hard to cosplay Devil's Carnival because most people are not going to know it as much as Repo. Plus, it's like I said, it's very carnival-ish. So it's like you're really not going to know, like, okay, that person's supposed to be. Where like Repo kind of has that, especially those 3.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were probably, like I said, if you were playing Shiloh, no one would probably know you were cosplaying Shiloh as much. I mean, depending on what you were, like Largo, you could probably be. But like I said, or even like I said, Bill's character in Repo, you're really not going to know that much that it's him unless you're walking around with your chest open and then
With
have all the scars and stuff like the stitches and stuff. You probably could do that, where those characters are so defined with obviously with the face and stuff like that, and then obviously like you have the grave robber being such an iconic character, and then Blind Mag being such a predominantly looking character that you can tell what those are from. So I think that's really like the main play for as far as like Repo versus Genetic on that side of it. I think a lot too has to go with with the fact that Repo kind of had a bigger, I mean, it's been around a little longer. It kind of had, like I said, it's got that cult status where Devil's Carnival and Alleluia maybe haven't gotten to that point. You got to realize, even when Repo Genetic, I mean, you could probably tell me right now on your phone because I don't remember the year, but it was 2000 and I want to say 2008 maybe Repo Genetic Opera came out.
I got you covered here, brother. Give me
Trying to remember what.
Got it. Yeah, 08.
Yeah, 08. So you got to realize, okay, this movie came out in 08, right?
08, 2012 for Devil's Carnival.
Yeah.
And Alleluia was 16.
Yeah, 16. But yeah, you got to realize, okay, so 08 is when Repo the Genetic Opera came out, right? Did you see anybody cosplaying in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012? It was a little while until, like, you're now seeing people cosplay in Repo Genetic Opera. And not that people haven't done it for the few years, but in general, like Rocky Horror. It takes a while for that cult status to kind of be. And like I said, with the Devil's Carnival and the Devil's Carnival Hallelujah, we really maybe haven't gotten to those years where people are going to start getting into those being cult movies and start following them and start doing the cosplaying to that. Where, like I said, with Repo, it's been around for a lot longer that now you can. Like I said, I mean, there were definitely people who were fans of Repo the Genetic from day one that probably went to cons the next time they went to a con and probably did it. But you got to realize that 99.9% of the people are going to be like, no idea who that person's cosplaying. A lot of
Right.
people are not going to know that. Even nowadays, like even like when we were there, we laughed about it, but our vendor friends that we saw in New Jersey dressed up, as the grave robber. They dressed up as Blind Mag, and they dressed up as Ogre's character,
Yeah.
and as Bobby.
Shout out
Yeah.
to Abracadabra, New NYC.
Yeah. So, but the funny thing was, they were like, "Do you know who we are?" and it comes to a cosplay if you're at a horror convention and you're cosplaying stuff. Sometimes we do see stuff where we're like, "Okay, yeah, what's that from? I don't know what that's from." Because some people cosplay different things, or maybe it's like animated character or a video game character that people don't know. But obviously, when you're walking around like as Michael Myers, everybody knows who that is, and stuff like that. So like to be 2025 right now and dressed up, and even like the girls that we saw in 2024 in New Jersey, we're kind of surprised that we knew who they were cosplaying as when they were cosplaying as as the Repo, the genetic opera. So it's kind of like that
Poppy
where it's
and
like
Blind Mag.
yeah. So it's kind of like one of those ones like, yeah, people are doing it, but people are like, oh my God, you know this film? Like, I think it's starting to get more of that cult status now where it is. Where that's like I said, I don't think Devil's Carnival has brewed enough where it's going to get to it. Probably, hopefully down. I mean, and then again, it's like, okay, who are you gonna do? I mean, as far as cosplaying for that, I mean, you could cosplay. I mean, Ogre's character is almost impossible to do because it's weird green and crazy shit, and he can stiff his face. Painted doll, maybe a little bit, but she's so tough that most people probably aren't gonna get it as much. So like, you're gonna be the devil, and I don't know, man. I'm like, from one devil to another devil. That's a cosplaying commitment
That's a
because not only is that makeup beat red and then the clown makeup over on top of it, you have those long ass horns that he has that are freaking bitching. So I think, like I said, when it comes to that, but with the showdown and stuff like that, I mean, I definitely would give Repo a little bit of that benefit, but like I said, only because it's like, is that benefit maybe because of it's been longer in the stew? It's been it's been simmering a little bit more than the Devil's Carnival, so that's not you taste a little bit of the Repo. Yeah, okay, that stew is good. With Devil Carnival, okay, may need a little more time to
developing
brew
some
and develop.
flavor, a little more marinating.
Yeah. So I think, like I said, I mean, ultimately, yeah, we could probably go with Repo as being the winner, but I think ultimately, the winner should be fans and fans of the genre overall, man. You should just go, and if you're a fan of Repo and you haven't seen the Devil's Carnival and all of you, go and check those out, man. Go and see those movies. If you're a fan of, more than likely, if you're a fan of Devil's Carnival and Devil Carnival, you probably have seen Repo. But if you haven't seen Repo, go back and see Repo and stuff like that, and understand where those things are, so that conversation doesn't come around. If like I said, with our abracadabra guys and stuff like that, you shouldn't have to ask a question. Do you know who we are?
You're
Or like
right.
like I said, no one, when somebody dresses up as Michael Myers or Jason, no one ever questions it. It's like, yeah, that guy's Jason, or this guy's Deadpool, or that. It should just be like, oh, sweet, man, everybody should know who it is, especially if you're in the horror element. I mean, I understand if you're not as much. And like I said, these movies aren't going to be for everybody, because even if you're a horror fan, most people, in all honesty, can't stand musicals.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have to get, if you don't like musicals, you're not going to, there's no way that I'm going to be able to push these movies for you to watch them. If you do not like musicals,
Yeah.
these are not for you. And I don't necessarily mean musicals in the sense of like, okay, yes, it's got that horror element to it, so I can definitely sell you. But if you don't, like I said, if you don't like Rocky Horror Picture Show, Little Shops of Horror, Sweeney Todd, you're not gonna like these movies at all.
No.
There's just no way.
Not
So
No, you're definitely right, my friend. So Fangs and Infernos, here's the way it's going to be. So 8.0s across the board. Repo versus both Devils Carnivals. So by literally the distance of a blood drop, we're going to give the victory to Repo, the genetic opera, really solely based on the Fangs and Infernos themselves. And again, just like Devil said, it's really about the fact that the stew has simmered, marinated a little bit longer, and has that following, Rocky Horror style, to where we see people doing the Repo thing. We have yet to really see the Devil's Carnival thing happen, which it has happened. I've seen it before. But there has been more Repo than there's been Devil Carnival. So we're leaving it, the victory to Repo, based off the current fan reception. But just like the Devil said, when you're committing to cosplays, don't be ashamed to understand, to have that confidence that people are either going to recognize you or they're not. But you don't need to be seeking approval for it. But however, just like we discussed, we still, though, urge you guys, watch them all. If you know the Devil's Carnival movies but haven't introduced yourself to Repo, make sure you do so. If you're very familiar with Repo and have not gone into the Devil's world, make sure that you guys go and do that. So I didn't think it was going to get much closer than a previous showdown that we had, but this one was by far our closest to date. But by the distance of a blood drop, victory does go to the Vampire for this one, with Repo, the genetic opera, taking out the Devil's Carnival movies. But this was an absolutely fantastic one, my friend, and I super can't wait for the next one, because the next ones are going to be a lot of fun, as they always are. But most importantly, of course, shout out to our partners and sponsors for everything that you guys do for the Vampire and Devil podcast. And of course, we love you so much as well. And a special shout out, of course, to our Fangs, friends, and loved ones at rockandhorror.com, who handle the Vampire and Devil podcast merch. So make sure that you guys go to rockandhorror.com, go to the Vampire and Devil collab category, and shop till you drop at everything Vampire and Devil. This was an absolutely fantastic one, Fangs and Infernos. We appreciate you and love you. But horns up, fangs out.
Devil, my friend, I think it's time that we spill the tea. Brutalities. Vampire and Devil podcast couldn't be more excited, more humbled to let you all know that we have partnered with very dear friends of ours for a long time in Brutalities. And there's so much great stuff, so many flavors, so much to enjoy, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about it. Isn't that right there, my friend?
Oh yeah, we like it hot. Of course the Inferno likes it hot. Do you like the hot tea? Well, you might as well get some Brutality. Yeah, horror movies, puns, rock and roll, Brutality's got it all.
Absolutely. When it comes to the vampire, you know that he's going to absolutely gravitate towards that Nosferatu or that Nosferatu brew. Absolutely a favorite of mine. And we got to show a little bit love to, by all means, the biggest franchise in horror right now. That would be Terrifier. So Brutalities has brought you Terrifier. But that's just from the vampire. The devil has some favorites of his own.
Oh yeah, do you like the movie Pumpkinhead? Well, how about a little pumpkin bread for your throat holes? And like I said, with the rock and roll fans and the horror fans, Wednesday 13 fans, do you like Wednesday 13 and tea? How about a couple of those? With the Summertime Suicide and a couple other ones too. So if you like Wednesday 13 and you like the tea and you like the Brutalities, go to the website.
Absolutely. And so, of course, we like to look out for those that look out for us. We love you, Fangs. We love you, Infernos. But as a courtesy from Brutalities to be bestowed on you, we have that Vampire and Devil coupon code, don't we, my friend?
Oh, yeah. You want to save a little dough, little cheddar, maybe buy some more shit? Go on the line, Brutalities, type in Vampire and Devil, and you get 10% off your order. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So it's getting into the chilly weather. People need to warm their bones. They need to warm what little skin they may or may not have. But Brutalities is the way to get it done. So that's the way it's going to be, because Vampire and Devil said so. Horns up, fangs out for Brutalities. All right, Fangs, let's talk a little bit about a brand new Coffin Nails. We're going to take this one back to 2007, and we're going to talk about Gothic Vampires from Hell, Battle of the Bands. Look, this one is out there. It definitely is not very good. It's incredibly independent and looks very, very much like a film student's final project. Hopefully they passed. We've got Bloody Marys that look like red Kool-Aid. We've got really excessive blood squirting out of pretty obvious props. The concept is overall relatively solid, you know, typical band trying to make it. Record label's interested. Record label happens to be Vampires Incognito, and doesn't really go much deeper than that. It's a pretty generic concept behind the movie, and it's like concept of like execution where they tried, but kind of fell flat and kind of weak in like certain areas. Movie's not really going to get much more than a 3, considering it's like goth music involved. I'll bump it half a point, give it a 3.5 since I did make it through the movie, but that's really all that you're going to get from it. It's actually a movie that was done by Cleopatra Records. It's actually a record label that I'm quite fond of. They do a lot of stuff with Danzig, a lot of things with like 45 Grave, as well as like, you know, Morning Noise and stuff like that. So there's actually a lot that Cleopatra Records does that I really like, so I don't want to go like too hard into this one, but at the same time, it just kind of is what it is. I mean, when it comes to vampire movies, I'm going to be incredibly direct and very, very open and honest about the way that I grade them. So 3.5 is all that Gothic Vampires from Hell is going to get from 2007. But you know what? It's fun. It was an interesting ride, but overall execution, random BDSM, and you know, like titty flashes for no reason, and it's only really going to get you so far. So Fangs, that's the way it's going to be. Again, 3.5, Gothic Vampires from Hell, Cleopatra Records. Horns up, Fangs out. Ghouls and Fangs, Vampire and the Devil here. We got a little question for you. Devil, there's kind of a triangle, a 3-headed monster per se, when it comes to Baltimore, that I don't think people necessarily realize. We've got Edgar Allan Poe. We've got John Waters. But what else do we have?
We got the Ouija boards, oh yeah.
Absolutely. Starting in Baltimore way back in the day, a lot of people are unfamiliar with William Fuld and Elijah Bond, who patented, and the birth of the Ouija board was right here in Baltimore. Devil and Vampire coming at you from the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore, courtesy of our friend John Kozik, who invited us out to check it out and shoot a little conversation action to let you guys all know. Of course, you've seen on our socials that we have partnered with both museums, and we couldn't be more appreciative to John for that opportunity. So whenever you're here in Baltimore, of course, right attached to the Bazaar Oddity Shop off of the Avenue, you have Witchboard Museum Baltimore. And when you're in Witch City, USA, up in Salem, Massachusetts, that's when you get to visit the Salem Witchboard Museum.
Oh yeah, if you want to see some cool stuff, see some cool boards, get some cool history, go see our boy John. Man, that guy is really awesome, man. That dude knows his boards, he knows his history, he's about preserving the society of witch boards and the talking boards and all that goodness. And you know, we love it. We love the fact that, you know, they were gonna bring in this museum here in Baltimore, so all the Baltimore fans or all your East Coast fans or maybe not as far away, going up to Salem, come out to Baltimore and check it out, you know what I mean? Because there's some cool stuff in this museum, and you gotta check it out, because the devil and the vampire said so.
That is facts right there, my friend. Again, absolutely attached to the Bazaar Oddities shop in the Avenue in Hamden for the Baltimore established Witchboard Museum, or off of Essex Street in Salem, Massachusetts for the Salem Witchboard Museum. Horns up, Fangs out.